Chapter 1659. The black flames formed from the black smoke were some obscure things that Qin Feng accidentally came into contact with in the process of cultivation, the techniques he had come into contact with, and even his bloodline, as well as other adventuring processes. Not only Qin Feng, but many experts would inevitably come into contact with some things in the early growth process and leave some mark. For example, the experts of the Spirit Sea world would inevitably be affected by Qin Feng, the ruler of the Spirit Sea in the process of growth. In the future, if Qin Feng were to fall one day, he could use this brand to be resurrected. Most of this influence had no effect on Qin Feng at all, and only a small part of it might cause some trouble for him. But as his cultivation improved, these things would gradually be removed. Every third step Tao ancestor was unique and would not be affected by any existence, any rules, or any other great Tao. Qin Feng had just entered the third step Tao ancestor realm and was ignorant. At this time, with the help of Tao ancestor Hongjun, it could be said that he had saved hundreds of thousands of years, or even millions of years of bitter cultivation, and reached the golden body realm in one step. As the black flames in his body were dissolved, although Qin Feng did not notice it, he felt that his cultivation became smoother, as if some heavy burden had been removed from his body. 30 years passed in a flash. Suddenly, one day, Qin Feng opened his eyes and found that he had left the purple cloud palace and stood in the chaotic astral wind. In his eyes, above the 33 heavens, the purple cloud palace had completely disappeared. Slightly feeling the changes in his body, Qin Feng could not hide a trace of joy in his eyes. The extremely pure grand mist holy power in his body circulated without the slightest flaw. The grand mist holy power was extremely pure. Qin Feng used to think that his grand mist holy power was pure, but compared to the grand mist holy power circulating in his body now, it was like a muddy yellow river covered with sand. The power of this pure grand mist holy power did not increase much, but the benefits to Qin Feng were indescribable. It was as if a divine weapon that had been covered by sand and rust had finally revealed its sharpness. Whether it was the clarity of the primordial spirit or the speed of cultivation, it was greatly improved. There was also the hidden danger in his bloodline. These were not the most important things. In Qin Feng's opinion, the most important thing was that he had underestimated the road ahead. Reality had proven that his insistence on combining the three corpses into one, the first part of the eternal bloodline road, was not wrong. This knowledge was a strong support for Qin Feng's Tao intent and confidence. This made his conviction even more firm. The only thing left before him was how to combine the three corpses in a short period of time, or how to integrate the three innate laws that he had comprehended into the primordial bloodline in a short period of time. There was a sense of intimacy in Qin Feng's expression. The great tribulation of the chaos epoch would soon arrive. It wasn't easy to merge the three corpses or upgrade the primordial bloodline before the great tribulation of the end of the chaos epoch. The woman he loved, the divine concubines by his side, his disciples, his children, and even the Spirit Sea world could safely survive this era. To a certain extent, their lives were tied to him. And this, Taoist Hongjun had already pointed out a path for him. Qin Feng glanced at the primordial world. His expression flashed, and his gaze finally landed outside the 33 heavens. According to his chief master, Taoist Hongjun, there was already a huge world and the primordial world outside the outer realm galaxy of the primordial world. There might be some very troublesome existences inside. In short, the meaning behind his words was that he had to block the tough ones and give the primordial world time to devour and digest these worlds. Qin Feng bowed slightly in the direction of the purple cloud palace and quietly disappeared on the spot. Outside the 33 heavens was the outer realm galaxy. The Milky Way was vast and mighty. Billions of stars formed a vast and mighty Milky Way. This galaxy not only nurtured countless civilizations of the outer realm, but it was also a natural barrier between the primordial world and the other outer realms. It was also the last barrier. It could be considered an existence like the moat of the primordial world. If one day the outer realm fought outside the outer realm galaxy, it meant that the primordial world had already been attacked. Qin Feng flew at an extremely fast speed. After leaving the purple cloud palace, he quickly reached the edge of the outer realm galaxy. From afar, he saw many large stars. Light filled the sky. Countless heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals were stationed here, building huge war fortresses one after another. They guarded the heavenly pass and sealed off the outer realm galaxy. In the heavenly court, 80 to 90% of the troops were deployed here. In the outer realm galaxy, there were many powerful figures who had set up their Taoist temples here. Countless disciples, heavenly soldiers, and heavenly generals passed through the fortresses above the outer realm galaxy. Qin Feng even sensed the aura of several Tao ancestors faintly discernible. On the stars there were countless experts, and the civilization was at its peak. Outside the outer realm galaxy, the distance was extremely far. Cultivators would usually set up inter-realm teleportation arrays. Qin Feng, on the other hand, was much simpler. After taking a look, his figure passed through the outer realm galaxy like a stream of light and appeared outside the outer realm galaxy fortress. As far as the eye could see, outside the outer realm galaxy, it was chaos. In the chaos, many worlds had already merged with the outer realm galaxy. Qin Feng's primeval world had merged with more worlds than he had imagined. It was not even rare in the greater Kiliacosm. Many ancient half-step golden immortals ruled over these outer realms. As the local tyrant, he was far away from the center of the primeval world where the dignity of the many Tao ancestors was. Qin Feng's arrival was silent. Although most of the elite experts in the heavenly court were in the outer realm galaxy, no one noticed Qin Feng's arrival. At that moment, the Tao ancestors of the three major cultivation systems of the primeval world, the immortal Tao, the Buddhist Tao, and the primeval world, had already looked over. Qin Feng looked over. In the center of the outer realm galaxy, a great Tao of chaos was forcefully squeezed through. It was a land of chaos. There was no beginning and no end. It was born out of nothing. It was neither born nor destroyed. It was neither dirty nor pure. There seemed to be countless shimmering vortexes surging, vaguely forming a huge crack. The crack extended into the depths of the outer realm galaxy. In the crack, space-time was distorted, and countless rays of light were raging. It vaguely looked like a bottomless hole that was rapidly spinning. This bottomless pit contained an extremely terrifying aura that could easily strangle an ordinary Tao ancestor, causing people to be intimidated at first glance. Many powerful existences were looking at this crack with scrutinizing eyes. This was probably the only barrier that blocked the gazes of many Tao ancestors. Otherwise, if a new huge world squeezed in from outside the chaos, some of the great sects in the primeval world would have already rubbed their fists and rushed in impatiently. Chapter 1660. Even so, there were already many great divinities preparing to tear open the huge hole and enter the completely strange big world at any time. Qin Feng just glanced at it and his figure flashed. Like a ray of light, he directly disappeared into the huge void crack. It's him! It's that Tao ancestor. Tao ancestor Green Lotus. Many great divinities were shocked by the sudden flash of light. However, several Tao ancestors who had been paying attention and studying this place saw it clearly. For a moment, a trace of shock flashed across their faces. But then they understood. In the untainted world, in the era when the sect masters were in seclusion, the strongest person in the untainted world was probably Tao ancestor Green Lotus. To be able to easily enter the huge space-time crack and not be afraid of the entanglement of the power of the two worlds, I'm afraid he has already entered the third step. In the Star River, on the ancient Taiyin Star, in the Guanghan Tao Palace, Tao ancestor Guanghan circulated coldly. It was as if time and space were frozen. Tao ancestor Guanghan was slightly melancholic. In this world, in addition to the 3 pure Tao ancestors and the 2 Buddhist sect masters, she was probably second only to the 5 third-step Tao ancestors. Even Tao ancestor Inda, who controlled the netherworld samsara in the netherworld, was slightly inferior to her. Unfortunately, she had been stuck at the peak of the second-step Tao ancestor all these years. But immediately, Tao ancestor Guanghan's expression recovered. Soon, it won't be long. The 3 pure Tao ancestors had other opportunities. Amitabha, Buddha Mother's divine sense traveled all over the world. She was not inferior to the 5. The gigantic vortex wasn't calm at all. Within the duskiness, there were many terrifying dangers. When Qin Feng entered, he instantly felt an extremely terrifying pressure and chaos, as well as a twisting energy that blasted into his skin. This was a very terrifying force. Even the ordinary rules of heaven and earth would be completely distorted. Clang clang. Sparks flew and a golden light appeared on Qin Feng's skin. The strange distortion force could distort the ordinary rules of heaven and earth, but it could not distort his ultimate divine body. The expansion of the 2 worlds, the collision and fusion of the rules of heaven and earth in the crystal wall system of the 2 worlds, and the birth of a strange force? Qin Feng had a strange look in his eyes as he pondered. It seems that this world that has collided with the primitive world is not much weaker than the primitive world. Qin Feng could be considered an experienced and knowledgeable person. There were also many collisions between worlds. Generally speaking, if 2 worlds with obvious strength came into contact with each other, such a scene would not occur. One was strong while the other was weak. The more powerful the laws of heaven and earth in the stronger world, such as the spirit sea world, would quickly suppress the weaker world. Then, the laws of heaven and earth would forcefully merge and devour the weaker world. The space-time rift was very long, and there was also a very dangerous chaos storm. Under the terrifying chaos storm, the laws of heaven and earth were blown away like tofu. The terrifying gray storms were like tornadoes, bringing with them a terrifying might that could destroy everything as they swept out in all directions. Within them were bolts of lightning that could destroy everything. Even Qin Feng didn't dare to face the sharpness of this attack head-on. Qin Feng's figure turned into light, and pale golden light circulated around him. Wherever he passed, the terrifying power of the laws of the world seemed to solidify in the golden light. A moment later, Qin Feng could already see a faint light. Rumble! The space-time rift shook violently, and a golden light shattered the void of the rift, suddenly appearing in a huge world. A mysterious world appeared in front of Qin Feng. Just as Qin Feng arrived in the mysterious world, slight ripples appeared in heaven and earth, and fate changed. Some powerful people in the mysterious world seemed to have sensed something. Perhaps they didn't immediately notice Qin Feng's arrival, but they saw the change in fate. The cultivation system of the mysterious world was different from any world that Qin Feng had seen. This mysterious world was mainly based on bloodline laws. In this mysterious world, many experts didn't need to cultivate much. Many gods were blessed by the heavens as soon as they appeared. They were recognized by the laws of heaven and earth, and they controlled powerful laws or rules. The more powerful the existence, the more potential and strength of the children born would be. However, this was the case for both success and failure. They were born with powerful abilities and could control the rules of the world. They were high and mighty, standing above all other creatures. This caused many experts to not think about improving themselves. They couldn't even achieve perfect control. They even retreated, fought among themselves, and fell into debauchery. Unlike other powerful worlds, some weak creatures took one step at a time. Their hearts were tenacious and invulnerable, and they could completely control their cultivation with their own state of mind. Qin Feng didn't know how long he flew among the white clouds. It might be hundreds of millions of kilometers. He was operating the bronze light, quietly transforming it, and mastering the laws of heaven and earth of this world. He concealed his aura. At the same time, his mind was also investigating the origin of this mysterious world. Compared to the other third-step Tao ancestors from other worlds, Qin Feng wanted to take the opportunity to steal the origin of this mysterious world. There was only one way to combine the three corpses and merge their bloodlines in a short time, and that was to steal the origin of this world. The mysterious world's territory was extremely vast, at least not smaller than the primordial world. There were many powerful people in it. Qin Feng didn't act rashly. His spiritual consciousness split into hundreds of millions, and countless avatars quietly descended into the kingdom of the human world. He began to collect information about some of the powerful people in this world and understand the cultivation system of this world. The origin of the mysterious world quickly appeared in Qin Feng's mind. To Qin Feng's surprise, there was no god of creation in this mysterious world. It was rumored that this mysterious world, the origin of the universe, was chaos. When the universe was in chaos, it gave birth to an ancient and powerful consciousness. This consciousness was blank and had no intelligence. It was very powerful, but it didn't have any intelligence. It only had the instinct to evolve. Then, after an unknown period of time, the chaos, in this instinctive, drifting, and slow state, was separated and turned into turbidity. And in the center, in the core of the chaos, a bottomless hole appeared. This deep hole was later called the Jinluan Chasm by the ancient gods of the primordial era. In the center of it, a spring called Wagmere was born from the eternal glimmer. This spring was the source of 12 great rivers collectively known as the Alivigar River. It evolved into 12 great rivers. The great rivers flowed in the chaos, sweeping up some of the nutrients in the chaos and giving birth to hundreds of ancient existences. These ancient existences were the gods of the primordial era. They were the oldest group of gods born in the chaos. They didn't have consciousness at first and only knew how to fight in the chaos. In the battle, some of the gods of the primordial era died. Their corpses lay in the river, giving birth to mountains, rivers, the sky, and the firmament. After some of the gods of the primordial era died, their blood flowed, and many strange creatures were born in their flesh and blood. For example, the six-headed giant, the dwarf, the poison dragon, and so on. Chapter 1661. Later in the battle, as some of the original gods fell, some of the original gods were born with wisdom in the battle and began to stop this meaningless battle. As the fighting stopped, there were only a dozen primordial gods left. They found that in the process of the battle, a huge world emerged with the center of the holy spring as the center. Although the remaining dozen or so original gods had stopped fighting instinctively, most of them had suffered great injuries from the constant fighting over the years. Many of them had hurt their foundation. Over the long years, many of the dozen original gods had died of serious injuries that were difficult to recover from, or died in the hands of the first group of creatures in this huge world because of serious injuries. Some of the remaining flesh and blood, the rules of godhood, helped the most powerful people in the first group of creatures. The rest of the group hid to heal. Of course, there were also a few of the most powerful original gods who only suffered some minor injuries. Among them, the most famous one was called Ymir. Ymir was the ancestor of the frost giant. In the previous legends, it was said that one of the 3 springs that raised the world tree, the Wagmere Holy Spring, had once turned into 12 rivers in the chaos. The 12 rivers were mixed with a part of the divine essence after the fall of the original gods, and nurtured many powerful creatures. Some creatures even became gods in the rivers. With the fall of the original gods, a part of the original gods turned into mountains, rivers, and the earth. The 12 rivers had undergone tremendous changes. First of all, it was affected by the cold after the fall of a frost original god. The cold wind was biting cold, and part of the north was frozen into glaciers, forming the eternal ice kingdom. Some of the collapsed icebergs were hit by the hot wind in the south, melted into water vapor and rose up, and condensed into frost and snow by the cold, and fell and melted into water vapor again. This cycle was repeated. This was a process of yin and yang coexisting. In this process of yin and yang coexisting, Ymir was the first to recover in the river. Ymir was also an ancient god who mastered the original frost. After the Great War of the original, he also suffered some injuries that were not light or serious. He had been hiding in the bottomless pit of the Jinluan chasm to recover his injuries. He was the first primordial ancient god to recover from the Great Primordial War. Of course, there were also legends that Ymir had been hiding in the ice and snow of the 12 rivers known as Alivigar. It was said that one of the 12 rivers contained poison. Because Ymir recovered from his injuries in it, he absorbed part of the power of the river, so his descendants, the frost giants, had this poison in their blood. Ymir was the original frost giant, the ancestor of the frost giants. Another primordial ancient god, Buli, had recovered at about the same time as him. The name Burli was not very famous, but his descendants were very famous. He was the ancestor of this branch of the Osso gods. According to legend, he was killed by the ancestor of the frost giants when he was fighting over a large cow. As for why they were fighting over the big cow, it was because the big cow also had a history. Her milk gave birth to the highlands and lakes of the mysterious world, nourishing the rivers and creating life. After Buli's death, an ancient god was born from his divine body. This ancient god inherited most of Buli's power and called himself Bao-Er. Bao-Er inherited the will of the primordial ancient god and then fought with the ancestor of the frost giants, and in the process of the battle, he took away a daughter of the ancestor of the frost giants and had triplets with her. The eldest son, Odin, the second son, Willi, and the third son, Zefei. These three were the origin of the Osso gods, and Odin was the first king of the Osso god. Understanding this, Qin Feng had already understood that this was the world of Norse mythology. However, this may not be the world of Norse mythology in the simple sense. When Qin Feng flew over the clouds, he saw a group of angels flying over the sky and frequently landing in the churches of the mortal countries. He had never heard of angels in the world of Norse mythology. The Norse gods were similar to the Olympus gods. These two gods were born because they controlled the rules and the power of heaven and earth. The gods looked down on hundreds of millions of creatures from the clouds. They were famous for their pride. Qin Feng thought for a moment and had a direction. If Qin Feng wanted to plunder the origin of this world, there were only two ways. One was to directly sweep away the powerhouses of this world with supreme power. There were too many variables. Qin Feng estimated that with his current strength, he might not be able to do it. Moreover, it was very dangerous and could easily cause the primordial gods who had not fallen to gang up on him. Some kind of mutation had occurred in the Norse world, and it was not weaker than the primordial world. The primordial world could give birth to the 3 pure ones and the 2 Buddhist sect masters, who were Tao ancestors of the 3rd step. Without a doubt, it was impossible for the Norse world to not have powerhouses of the same level. Then, there was only one way left, which was to integrate into the Norse world and seize the position of a supreme god, corresponding to the Tao ancestor of the 3rd step, in the Norse world. In the Norse world, the Norse gods had millions of powerful gods, and many powerful clergy had already given birth to powerful main god. Basically, there were not many places that Qin Feng could intervene in. The rules of the Norse world and the primordial world were somewhat different. Here, the gods were in charge. As an outsider, even if his strength was comparable to that of a main god or a supreme god above the king of gods, if he could not integrate into the Norse world, it would be difficult for him to come into contact with and steal the origin of the Norse world. Right now, Qin Feng could at most be considered a supreme god of another world. Such a supreme god from another world was naturally suppressed by the rules and was ostracized by the Norse world. If his identity was exposed, he might be found by the supreme gods of the Norse world and be beaten to death together. Qin Feng was lucky that he had the power of bronze from the bronze altar, which concealed his aura. Otherwise, he would have been exposed to many unknown methods of some of the powerful supreme gods in the Norse world. Heim, the netherworld. This was the final place of all living things in the Norse world. Even the fallen gods would enter the netherworld of Heim and accept death here. Qin Feng's figure appeared here. His eyes flashed with coldness. Among the many rules, there was nothing easier to become a supreme god than to control death. Of course, the most important thing was that the death of the netherworld here had a special identity and was easier to deal with. Qin Feng wanted to look up. As far as the eye could see, this place was incomparably dark and extremely cold. The aura of the netherworld emerged on the barren land for hundreds of millions of miles. Before entering the netherworld of Heim, Qin Feng saw a large river. The river water was cold and endless. It rushed down from upstream with monstrous momentum. As long as he passed the crystal bridge above the river, he could directly enter the netherworld of Heim. Chapter 1662. In the Norse pantheon, the god of death in charge of the underworld of Heim was Hel. She was a goddess. However, in the mortal world, many creatures were more willing to call her a monster. It was rumored that her appearance was terrifying. One side was a skeleton, and the other side was a human face. It was terrifying and filled with the aura of death. However, compared to her brothers, the god of death, Hel, had decent features. Speaking of Hel's family, there was another leader of the Aesir gods. The god of fire, Loki. Of course, the gods of the Aesir gods were more willing to call him the evil god, Loki. The god of fire, Loki, and the god king, Odin, were brothers. However, they were not biological brothers. Loki's mother was a giant. As everyone knew, the Aesir gods and the giants were natural enemies. This grudge could be traced back to the first generation of the frost giants and the ancestor of the Aesir gods, Bli. Like the Greek gods who were like stallions, the Aesir gods, who were mainly Norse gods, also liked to have harems. However, compared to the Greek gods, some of the gods of the Aesir gods had a much heavier taste. For example, Loki, the god of fire, had once turned into a mare and mated with a stallion. She also got pregnant and gave birth to the eight-legged divine horse, Sleipnir. The eight-legged divine horse, Sleipnir, later became the master of the Aesir gods, the god king, Odin's mount. Would a normal god's brain shut down and turn into a mare to get pregnant? Obviously not. However, Loki did that and got pregnant, leaving behind a mutant. However, there were also legends that when the gods were just born, their intelligence was chaotic, like a newborn baby. Without anyone to guide them, they were full of curiosity and eagerness to try new things. Other than the eight-legged divine horse, Sleipnir, the god of fire, Loki, had several very famous children. Among them were the three monsters that the Aesir gods hated and even feared. The demon wolf, Fenrir, the snake of the atrium, Jormungandr, or the giant serpent of the mortal world. The other was the god of death, Hel, or the god of death, Hel. These three monsters were born with extremely powerful evil powers and wielded extremely terrifying and powerful rules. In the fable of the three goddesses of fate, these three monsters would be the root of the disaster that would destroy the world and also the main culprits that would lead to the twilight of the god. Because of this fear, not long after the three monsters were born, they were sent away. The great python of earth, Jemingard, was suppressed at the bottom of the sea, unable to move. Demon wolf Fenrir was imprisoned in the back garden of the god king. This monster that could never eat its fill would always be in a state of hunger. Because death god Hel was in human form, he was treated better. However, because he was very different from the handsome gods of the Asgard divine clan, He was sent to the underworld of Hyam to become the death god and receive the undead of heaven and earth. The three monsters were undoubtedly powerful. Not long after they were born, they completely grasped the great power of their bloodline and became overgods, level 16. Moreover, he had the terrifying potential to threaten the god King Odin, who was above the 12 Asgard gods. Outside of Helm's underworld, in Qin Feng's eyes, the Aesir clan's so-called banishment of death god Hull was nothing. Wielding the divine power of death and the powerful priesthood that ran through hundreds of millions of creatures in the Nordic world, this could be considered an exile. Many powerful existences in the primeval world would probably cry for their parents and beg to be exiled a few more times. However, the gods of the Asgard divine clan, including death god Hull, did not think so. The dignified final land of the world was regarded as a barren land by the gods. In general, in the eyes of the Asgard gods, this was a dark and unpresentable corner where birds did not shit. The Dargial River before Helm's underworld was very vast. It was rumored that it originated from one of the first 12 rivers and had some great power. Qin Feng did not choose to barge in. According to the rules of Helm's underworld, he found a gold-plated crystal bridge above Helm's underworld. At this time, there were many dead souls on the crystal bridge in a long line, entering Helm's underworld from here. On the crystal bridge, there was a monster with extraordinary divine power guarding it. The monster was called Skeleton Modgud. It was a skeleton with a scythe in its hand. This monster was one of death god Hull's underlings. Qin Feng did not have the patience to wait in line. He directly revealed his human form and walked towards the crystal bridge. Wherever he passed, the bodies of the dead souls were involuntarily squeezed together. He had the strength to willfully cut in line. Skeleton Modgud obviously noticed this fellow who was trying to cut in line. A sinister look appeared on its skeletal face, and it rushed towards Qin Feng, swearing to teach this unruly fellow a lesson. According to the rules set by death god Hull, he could freely devour those who did not follow the rules on the bridge. Gulp! However, Qin Feng only waved his hand, and Skeleton Modgud was suddenly sent flying, falling directly from the crystal bridge. On the water surface there was not even a bubble. In the blink of an eye, it was washed away by the Dargial River. Little pawn, I have no time to waste with you. Under the dumbfounded gazes of the dead souls, Qin Feng directly crossed the crystal bridge. After crossing the crystal bridge, there was a forest of iron trees. The trees were as black as steel, and the leaves were also like pitch-black steel, revealing a metallic luster. The ground was flat, and this forest seemed to have existed since ancient times. No leaves had ever fallen. Qin Feng was clad in a black robe, and he wore a bamboo hat. His grand mist holy energy transformed into death energy, and he did not make a sound. After passing through the forest of iron trees, he arrived at the Gate of Hull. This was the second gate to enter Helm's underworld, and it was guarded by the blood-spotted giant dog, Garm. This vicious dog was extremely fierce. Don't underestimate this watchdog. It was also born from the flesh and blood of a fallen primordial god. Its innate divine strength was extremely powerful, and it grasped extremely powerful laws. It had already quietly become a chief god. This vicious dog did not give face to anyone. Guarding the Gate of Hull, any existence that tried to escape from Helm's underworld would become food in its stomach. However, if one entered from the outside, with good luck, they would not alarm this vicious dog. This watchdog usually curled up and slept in a cave called Nippa. This vicious dog was also lucky that it did not discover Qin Feng's uninvited arrival. Otherwise, it was very likely that it would have become a dog-meat hotpot. After passing through the Gate of Hull, one could be considered to have completely entered Helm's underworld. This place was colder and darker than Qin Feng had imagined. The bone-piercing cold and the profound darkness were the eternal keynote of this place. It was no wonder that the Aesir divine clan called it a barren land, a land of exile. There were not many buildings here, and Death God Hull did not look like someone who knew how to manage things. Many dead souls, in the bone-piercing cold wind and darkness, could only wail and wail as they watched themselves weaken bit by bit and even die. They turned into drifting death energy and became the Death God's nourishment. Primitive and rather crude method of use, what a waste! Qin Feng commented in his heart. The stingy otherworld supreme being, he could not help but feel heartache. Splash! The strange sound of water rang in Qin Feng's ears. It was like the friction of sharp knives, but also like boiling water in a large pot. This was the famous 9 rivers of Helm's underworld. It was said that they were the first 12 rivers that originated from the divine spring. After passing through the 9 rivers, at the riverside, Death God Hull's palace was in sight. Chapter 1663. Inside the temple, Death God Hull raised her head and stared at the black-robed man walking into the temple. She was shocked. A surge of majestic god force flowed around Death God Hull's body. The majesty of an over-god emerged. It's a waste for the Death God's godhead to fall into your hands. Leave it to me. Qin Feng shakes his head. Her doesn't even have time to say anything else. Qin Feng raises his hand and a pale golden light completely wraps her up. Hull's body shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. The pale golden light wrapped around the goddess and she quickly turned into a sparkling diamond. With a flash of golden light, the golden diamond fell into Qin Feng's palm. He raised his hand slightly, revealing a lifelike image of a terrifying goddess with a human face on one side and white bones on the other. Don't worry, I won't kill you. But you have to be quiet for a while. A faint smile appeared on Huang Xiaolong's face as he put away the golden diamond. In a flicker, Huang Xiaolong's gaze fell on the throne at the center of the temple. In an instant, Huang Xiaolong's figure disappeared from the spot. When he reappeared, he was sitting on the throne at the center of the Death God's temple. From the moment he sat on the central divine throne, Qin Feng could feel a surge of power surging from all directions, from the endless space and the depths of the endless underworld into the divine throne under his butt. Then, it poured into his body from the throne below. Death. The god force that contained the nature of the soul flowed slowly, merging with the grand mist holy energy in his body. It attempted to distort and change the grand mist holy energy in his body, gradually tempering his body and bringing him closer to death. His soul, nirvana. There were many impurities in the god force, such as hunger, sorrow, greed, worry, destruction, and so on. This is the Death God's godhead. Qin Feng understood in his heart, but the Death God's godhead's wide range of godheads surprised him. Sensing the changes in his body, a smile appeared on Qin Feng's face. His grand mist holy power slowly absorbed the Death God force that contained impurities. This strand of drifting Death God force was abnormally large, but compared to the supreme God force in Qin Feng's body, it was too inferior. Even if all 10,000 strands of Death God force were converted, they might not be able to transform into a single strand of grand mist holy force. However, this only lasted for a moment. If this continued for a long period of time, the divine power of death that drifted from Helm's nether realm would continue to pour into his body. It would be an enormous amount of divine power. Qin Feng sensed that it was the same level of divine duty power. There was a huge difference between the spiritual sea world and the spiritual sea world's divine duty power. Qin Feng was the world lord of the spirit sea world's hegemon. He had the supreme hegemonic domain, and he could sense an enormous amount of the world's origin energy pouring into him. It was actually only slightly superior to Helm's Lord of the Underworld, the Lord of Death. One had to know that it was a world and the sovereign power of a world. Strictly speaking, in terms of rank, not to mention the god King Odin, who was above the 12 main gods, even the god of origin, who was above the god king, was half a level higher. Currently, Helm was the lord of the underworld. The overlord of death's godhood could only be considered an incomplete over-god godhood. The divine seat of death was divided into many parts, and a portion of it was in the hands of other powerful beings. Qin Feng's mind flashed back to when he saw the angels emerging from the cloud gates. Qin Feng's gaze fell on Helm's underworld. After silently suppressing death god Hull, the next step was to completely condense his own divine duty of death and transform Helm's underworld. With such a vast underworld, if properly governed, not to mention condensing the divine duty of death into a supreme divine duty, condensing it into the God-King divine duty would not be a problem. Mysterious world. In a distant place there was a country completely similar to Asgard. It was a dark, gloomy, and deep country. The dead could rest in peace there, and countless countries praised the might of this dark and unfathomable country. This underworld was called the Underworld. In a great hall, following the sealing of death god Hull, Qin Feng began to condense a new divine duty of death. On the throne, a dignified, gloomy, and evil king's expression suddenly changed slightly. The rule of death is fluctuating. A new powerful death god has been born. This evil king was cold and as sharp as a knife. There was a strong murderous intent floating in the air. His gaze fell on another land of life in the distance. In this land of life, where the light of the gods shone, even the most ancient gods would not dare to compete with him for the divine duty of death. Only in other lands of life, or even further away, would those damned gods dare to offend him. One had to know that the strength and completeness of a divine duty were usually closely related to the strength of the main god who controlled the rules. Your Highness Hades, what's wrong? An incomparably handsome god looked at the King of Hell, whose expression suddenly changed as he stared at the King of Hell. Messenger of Zeus, go back and tell Zeus that I agree to his plan, but— He paused, raised his evil, handsome face, and looked at the incomparably handsome messenger. That incomparably handsome messenger understood and smiled. Your Highness King of the Underworld, His Majesty the God King already understands your meaning. You will get what you want. Very good. The Underworld King nodded in satisfaction, a trace of elegance flashing across his evil face. It would not take long. As long as his strength would definitely take a big step forward. At this time, in another huge country, darkness gathered and countless monsters rampaged. On an ancient throne, a valiant god, whose body was surrounded by endless decay and the power of death, was also frowning. Beside him, an extremely beautiful, dignified, and plump goddess with a motherly aura was looking at this valiant god. Osiris, did you feel any changes? Isis, the fluctuation of the rules of death, just now. I'm afraid that another powerful god, who is not inferior to me, has condensed the divine duty of death. The valiant god called Osiris had a gloomy look in his eyes. How is this possible? Other than Hades of the Greek god system, who can catch up with you in the domain of death? The plump goddess exclaimed and was also a little worried. So, under the rules of death, another god-king who is above the main god has been born. There was a trace of coldness in the goddess' eyes. The powerful god named Osiris had a grim look on his face. No matter what, we must find him first. Maybe we can ask that existence who is proficient in the changes of fate to help us. There was a trace of burning greed in the depths of his eyes. If he could devour that unknown god king of death, he would undoubtedly be one step closer to becoming a supreme god. This god king of the Greek god system was eyeing him covetously, and he also had plans to devour that god king of hell. If someone finds that a chapter is duplicated, they can first delete the bookshelf and then add it again. That's a problem with the system. They can just add the bookshelf again and refresh it. Chapter 1664. Not only were several powerful divine kings in charge of the rule of death affected. Among several god systems, some of the goddesses of fate also saw the sudden change in fate. The originally chaotic fate became abnormally turbid. There were also powerful gods of fate, such as the wisdom giant of the Norse god system. The three goddesses of fate tried to clear the fog and see the source of the turmoil, but to no avail. But at the same time, whether it was Odin of the Asur god race, Zeus of the Olympus god race, or the 9 pillar gods of the Egyptian god race, they all began to move. A mountain could not accommodate 2 tigers. Several powerful god races were all tigers and wolves. How could they sit idly by and watch another overlord appear in the world? Some of the primordial gods also began to appear, stirring up the situation and drawing some gods to their side. Clergy involved one's strength. The wider the clergy involved, the faster the divine power spread. It was undoubtedly directly related to the condensation of one's clergy and the increase of one's strength. In the netherworld of Heim, one could enter but not leave. Qin Feng condensed the death clergy in peace. He discovered a part of the mystery of the rule of heaven and earth in this world. This was a huge world that was completely different from most worlds. The rule of heaven and earth was almost completely different from the primeval world and many other worlds. In the primeval world, the spirit sea world, or other world, to break through to level 17, one usually needed to condense 2 opposite innate rules to break through and become a level 17 chaotic divine god. Oh, the Norse world called level 17, which was above the master god realm, God King. But the Norse world was different. One only needed to cultivate one type of rule of heaven and earth and use it as a derivation. Then, one could directly advance to God King. As for the supreme gods, they could master all the rules derived from this rule and make them their own. That was the supreme gods. And in this system, the role of the clergy was infinitely magnified, even directly linked to one's own divine path. In Qin Feng's view, it was like a container. Take the Death Master clergy as an example. The complete Death Master should be a God King clergy. Any god who obtained the God King clergy would have the potential to become a God King. If they did not die over time, they would most likely become a God King in the future. Another example was the Harvest Priesthood. This priesthood was the priesthood of the Master God. Any master who obtained it would have the potential to become the Master God of Harvest. Moreover, when the priesthood was condensed, one would be able to absorb a huge amount of free divine power from the void, and their cultivation speed would be 10 times or even 100 times faster than others. On the contrary, if one did not have a priesthood, no matter how talented one was or how much potential one had, one's cultivation speed would still be 100 or even 1,000 times faster than those of the same level who had a priesthood. In the Nordic world, the priesthood was strictly divided. From the lowest to the highest, they could be divided into fragmented priesthood, main god priesthood, and God King priesthood. As for the overgod's divine domain, they had the ability to rule and dominate. That kind of mighty existence was far from being differentiated by a single rank. First, let's talk about broken priesthoods. This meant that a complete priesthood was broken into countless pieces. He was like a god of fire. In this huge world, there were countless fire gods, and many gods had more or less condensed this divine title. However, according to how much they had mastered, the shattered priesthood could be divided into demigod, quasi-god, and true god. True gods could be divided into lower god, middle god, higher god, and peak higher god. Above them was the master god's divine domain. To a certain extent, the Master God's divine domain was already quite complete. It was equivalent to a fruit condensed from the precepts of heaven and earth. Anyone who could control it and refine it would become a godlord. According to Qin Feng's original understanding, it was basically a precept of heaven and earth and a master god. However, this huge world was a little strange. The thick precepts of heaven and earth were abnormally huge. Compared to the precepts of heaven and earth in the spirit sea world, the precepts of heaven and earth were like small streams and rivers. Perhaps it was because of this that this huge world could give birth to several masters at the same time on a single precept. However, in this way, the several masters also formed a competition of the great path. Any master god who swallowed up the other master god's divine domain on a single precept of heaven and earth would greatly increase their strength. Some of the thick precepts of heaven and earth, such as death, thunder, the sun, and so on, could give birth to several god-kings at the same time. The underworld of Heim was the final land of the Asgard gods. It was the final destination of a large number of living creatures, the kingdom of the dead, the paradise of the dead, and the birthplace of horror. The death divine domain it could condense was naturally at the master god level. Moreover, it had great potential to become the god-king of death. On the divine throne, Qin Feng closed his eyes. In his heart, a godhead representing death was born. The godhead was surrounded by many rays of light. In the center of the rays of light, one could faintly see the profoundness of death, decay, withering, hunger, sorrow, destruction, and wrath. Through it, a steady stream of death-drifting god-force from the underworld of Heim entered Huang Xiaolong's body. Bang! In the next moment, it was as if a mirror had been destroyed. The godhead representing death crumbled, turning into countless fragments that merged into the grand mist holy energy in Huang Xiaolong's body. Death was on the outside, and the divine Tao was inside. In the innate divine Tao that Qin Feng had created, there were no restrictions on creation, death, or space. These were all manifestations of the divine Tao. Creation could be the manifestation of the divine Tao. Space and death were the same. However, although the huge world was only a manifestation, the creation and space manifestations were completely different from this huge world. As if they were completely different from each other, they could not resonate with the world's origin. Only the law of death could enter the depths of the huge world through the law of death and steal a trace of the world's origin. As the trace of origin entered Qin Feng's body, the innate divine Tao law at the center of the world's origin grew stronger. In his bloodline, more and more of the heaven and earth's law energy entered his body. This speed was much faster than refining the dragon's blood essence. A trace of origin was equivalent to 700 to 800 types of dragon's blood essence. Moreover, there were no hidden dangers. It was unlike the dragon's blood essence, where the bloodline had to be cleansed of all kinds of impurities and imprints. The over-god level death divine domain can only absorb a small amount of origin. Although it is more effective than the way I refined the dragon's blood essence. Qin Feng had some thoughts in his mind. A light flashed in his eyes. He had to find a way to become a god-king as soon as possible and absorb more of the world's origin to strengthen his innate divine Tao's origin and improve his body of eternity. When Qin Feng successfully condensed the divine domain of the Lord of Death, the entire underworld of Haimu had undergone earth-shaking changes in the past 100 years. Qin Feng created a few avatars and the chaotic situation in Haimu's netherworld was cleaned up in 100 years. Some powerful evil spirits and godly spirits took over a part of Haimu's territory. Those who surrendered were taken in as able-bodied men, and those who refused to surrender were killed. The good were rewarded and the evil were punished. A place of reincarnation was being created. The changes in Haimu's netherworld were silent, but it wasn't like no one noticed them. Chapter 1665. The one who discovered the changes in Helm's underworld was none other than the guardian of Hell's Gate. Oh no, it was now called Hell's Gate Garm. This vicious dog had been awakened in its sleep by the increasingly exuberant power of death in Helm's underworld. Without a doubt, as a powerhouse who managed a huge world and made it flourish with each passing day, its ability to manage Helm's underworld was far superior to that of Death God Hull. In a short 100 years, not only had the power of Helm's underworld increased by 100 times, but it had also increased by dozens of times. The bountiful amount of souls attracted the attention of the blood-spotted giant dog. Crawled out of the magic cave. Its eyes stared at the countless wraiths wandering outside the 9 rivers of the underworld. The current Helm's Underworld was completely different from the previous Helm's Underworld. Although Helm's Underworld was known as the final land of death, it had always been a passive attraction to souls. Helm's Underworld had a strange power. After the death of the mortal world's creatures, Helm's Underworld had a natural attraction to them, attracting and calling the souls of the dead creatures. However, this attraction wasn't very useful sometimes. Many places were shrouded in the light of the gods, and the gods hated the final land. Usually, they would rather the souls disperse and return to heaven and earth than allow them to enter Helm's Underworld. Only a few vengeful souls and wraiths could be lured over by Hull's subordinate, death god Hull, who personally sent his divine servants. Of course, in the past, perhaps because it was afraid of death god Hull's majesty, or because it looked down on the 2s and 3s of wandering souls in Helm's Underworld, this vicious dog would only occasionally eat a few unlucky souls who ran to the edge of the magic cave. But now, Helm's Underworld was no longer a bumpy, lean old skeleton. Not only was its flesh glossy now, but it was also fat. This vicious dog couldn't hold back the savagery in its heart and began to devour in a small area. At first, Qin Feng didn't notice this kind of small-scale devouring. But after a few times, Qin Feng's divine clone discovered it. Immediately, it was reported to the main body in Death's Palace. The huge boneyard plain was filled with piles of white bones. Countless skeletons were shuttling back and forth in a daze. These skeletons didn't have any spiritual intelligence. They only had turbid instincts. Their white skeletons were constantly buffeted by the chilly wind. Whenever the chilly wind blew, these skeletons would instinctively wake up, and the soul flames in their eye sockets would wander out. If they were lucky enough, their soul flames would be able to withstand the sharp, cold wind. Then, they would be able to turn their gray soul flames back to their original white color, which would activate their instinct to become stronger and devour their own kind. They would become skeletal knights, skeletal lords, and even skeletal kings under the Grim Reaper. It wasn't just the skeletons. Aside from the skeletons, there were also zombies roaming the plains. Those cumbersome zombies were hiding in Zombie Cave. Every night, he would crawl out of the zombie cave and absorb the essence of the night moon outside of High Moo's netherworld. Compared to the skeleton clan and the zombie clan, you are undoubtedly much stronger. With a body that was as hard as metal and stone, even the lowest-level gray-haired zombies could easily kill the wandering skeletons. However, the zombie clan wasn't the most powerful creature in High Moo's netherworld. The abominations wrapped in stinking shrouds were naturally superior to the zombies. There were also the undead knights and black knights. They were much superior to the zombies. However, the top of the food chain in High Moo's netherworld was still the Dracolic. Those Dracolic were originally the mutants of death born after the death of the giant dragons. Once awakened, they were born with tyrannical strength and were mobile magic turret. Moreover, any Dracolic would be a lord when they attacked. They could easily launch the death worship. The blood-spotted giant dog, Garm, seemed to have a preference for bones. It had eaten the zombies before. They were disgusting and smelly. There were also the abominations. Those big guys were extremely tall and looked fleshy. When it first saw them, it was quite curious and swallowed one. But to be honest, the taste wasn't very good. Now that it thought about it, this huge, evil dog with blood-red spots all over its body was a little disgusting. As for the undead knights and black knights, these monsters rode white-bone horses that burned with countless hellish flames. They seemed to be called nightmares. The taste was not bad, and the quality of the soul was also very good. But they were all ghostly and extremely fast. It was not easy to catch them, and it was easy to alarm the death god's servants. The blood-spotted giant dog, Garm, now favored two major races, the skeletons and the Dracolic. The skeletons were huge in number and enough to eat. But the shortcomings were also obvious. The blood-spotted giant dog, Garm, felt that the soul power was too weak. Some of the smaller ones were not even enough to fill the gaps between its teeth. There were also monarch-rank existences. To be honest, the reason why it fell in love with the skeletons was that Garm had once eaten a skeleton's king. To be honest, that skeleton's king tasted excellent. It was crunchy and not inferior to the gods of the Asur clan in the divine palace. The quality of the soul was also quite good. The only drawback was that there were too few of them. The last time it ate one, it had tried to catch a few more for a sumptuous meal. Who would have thought that it was the only skeleton's king in High Mu's netherworld? Now Garm had a plan. It intended to let go of those skeletons' lords for the time being. Take care of them. Well, compared to the skeletons' kings, the taste of the skeletons' lords was still a little lacking. His gaze now fell on the group of Dracolic. Not only did the Dracolic taste good, but there were also a lot of them. The territory of the Dracolic was in the Dragon Ridge. The terrain there was extremely high. Some Dracolic liked to go in pairs and go to one of the 9 rivers in the netherworld to take a bath. That river was called Slider. It had a strange ability to eat the flesh and skin of the Dracolic. It had the effect of preventing decay. Some Dracolic liked to soak in it. They did not like the horrifying appearance of their white bones. It was probably their last trace of attachment to their lives after death. The blood-spotted giant dog, Garm, was a cunning guy. It was greedy, cruel, and full of treacherous wisdom back then. After it learned some of the habits of the Dracolic, it ambushed at the mouth of the river called Slider. Once a Dracolic came, it would go up and swallow it. Of course, Garm understood the principle of free range. It was not to kill them all. Usually, it would eat one batch and let another batch go. Small streams flow long. The sudden disappearance of a small group of Dracolic not only gave it a good meal, but also would not make the Dracolic suspicious and not dare to come again. After all, although Dracolic groups were in groups, most of them were disorganized and extremely selfish. According to past practice, Garm once again ambushed at the mouth of Slider early and waited for the arrival of the Dracolic. But this time, unexpectedly, Garm did not wait for the Dracolic to take a bath. Instead, it saw a strange god in a black robe flying down from a distance. The giant blood-spotted giant dog was a little surprised. A god came here to take a bath. But it was good. The taste of the gods of the immortal palace was not worse than that of the Dracolic. The godly spirit in front of him seemed to have a very pure godly power, so it shouldn't taste bad. Garm narrowed its eyes and opened its bloody mouth. The next moment, it rushed out like a bloody hole and shrouded the black-robed god. Garm was so excited that he couldn't wait to taste the food that was right in front of his mouth. However, the strange thing was that the black-robed god was not afraid as it imagined. Instead, it showed a strange expression. What kind of expression was that? Garm was a little puzzled, but it did not care. Anyway, it would eat first. Chapter 1666. Bang. The ferocious blood-spotted hound kicked an iron plate for the first time. Seeing the blood-spotted hound's bloody mouth, the strange black-robed god's first reaction was not to run away, but to raise his fist and smash the blood-spotted hound to the ground. Then, in a flash, the ferocious and terrifying blood-spotted hound became a huge punching bag. It was pinned to the ground and beaten up. As a king-level hound, the blood-spotted hound's combat strength was unquestionable. The rabies virus carried by an ordinary puppy could easily take the life of an adult. As a chief god-level watchdog, the venom contained in its teeth was enough to cause a chief god to suffer from a single bite. In fact, during the twilight of the gods in Norse mythology, Tyr, the war god of the 12 kings of the immortal palace, was bitten to death by this hound. However, in front of the black-robed god, its resistance was basically useless. Its ferocious nature had caused it to suffer. Bang. Beside the Slider River, the cold and dark land of the underworld of Heim, which was like steel and iron, cracked open many cracks, and many places became bumpy. Some flesh, pieces of organs, and even teeth fell into the bloody pit. The blood-spotted hound had been swung up and thrown to the ground. It lay on the ground, its vigorous life force causing it to suffer terrible injuries that could not be healed, but its life was not in danger yet. However, Garm would rather pass out now. It hurt too much. That terrible pain seemed to penetrate every inch of its flesh and went straight to the depths of its soul, making it want to smash its own head. "Are you still going to bite me?" Qin Feng circled the hound on the ground and lowered his head to ask. A woo. This usually ferocious and terrifying hound saw the smiling figure approaching and instinctively let out a low whine of fear. It was too terrifying. Ever since Galm had been guarding the gate of Hull, he had never been beaten so badly. He had already been beaten to the point where he did not even look like a dog. Not only were its 4 legs broken, its teeth were knocked out, and its skin was almost peeled off. "Looks like you haven't eaten enough." "Fine, I haven't eaten dog meat hot pot in a long time. I'll use you as the main ingredient today." Qin Feng looked at Garm with a pair of gloomy eyes. On the ground, the 4 limbs of the vicious dog and the white bones of its stomach were exposed. His eyes were filled with a picky expression, as if he was thinking about where to cut. "Exalted Goddess, please spare my life. Please don't eat dogs, Exalted Goddess. Dog meat doesn't taste good at all." Garm was frightened by this look. It was completely scared out of its wit. Just now, it had used all of its skills, but it couldn't hurt a single hair of this god. From this, one could see how terrified the black-robed god was. This was definitely a top-tier god, a god king. He might even be an utmost being. "That's true. You're a vicious, cunning dog. You also have a bad habit of eating random things. Eating so many random things is indeed disgusting." Qin Feng nodded, but his eyes immediately turned cold. "However, you've eaten so many of my little toys these days. How are you going to pay for that?" Qin Feng's eyes emitted a murderous aura. "Little toys." Garm looked at the black-robed god with a puzzled expression, but after a slight pause, it instantly reacted. Qin Feng was talking about those strange undead. Abominations, death knights, black knights, bone wyverns, dragon liches, and other newborn undead. Obviously, those undead were all created by this terrifying god in front of it. Its eyes were filled with shock and fear. At this time, its intestines were green with regret. If it knew that these newborn undead were created by this terrifying existence in front of it, no matter how greedy it wouldn't dare to steal and eat them. It was more or less wronged. "Your Highness, this god is willing to pay for your losses. Can you afford to pay for it?" Qin Feng sneered. "In the past few days, you've eaten 2 of my 3 zombie emperors, 2 Death Knight emperors, and the only loathsome emperor, the Skeleton Emperor." After a slight pause, Qin Feng's face darkened. "And my dragon liches, you've eaten half of them. This doesn't include the lords of various races that you've eaten, as well as the other ghosts. A zombie emperor costs 200,000 divinity crystals, a skeleton emperor costs about 200,000 divinity crystals, and an abomination emperor and a death knight emperor cost even more, no less than 350,000 divinity crystals. There are also a dozen or so dragon liches. You've eaten so much, no less than 45 million divinity crystals. And there are many undead lords, no less than 10 million divinity crystals. Garm, it's not that this god is looking down on you, but with your little fortune, can you afford to pay for it?" Qin Feng sneered at the evil dog on the ground. When Garm heard the first 4 to 5 million divinity crystals, its eyes were already dazed. When it heard the huge debt of 10 million, its eyes were a little dull, its limbs were weak, and it was foaming at the mouth. Divinity crystals were the measure of the gods. This kind of divinity crystal could not only be used as an auxiliary material for refining divine artifacts, but also as divine power to absorb and refine. Generally speaking, 100 cubic meters of free divine power could be condensed into 1 divinity crystal. Even some rich overgods could only get about 100,000 divinity crystals if they didn't eat or drink for a year. 10 million divinity crystals was an astronomical figure for Garm, who wasn't rich at all. And as everyone knew, Garm the blood-spotted giant dog was famous for having a huge appetite and had no savings at all. A poor dog. I think you'd better forget it. Use your life to compensate for my toy. Qin Feng sneered, not hiding the contempt in his eyes. Garm's mouth was foaming even more, and its legs were twitching even more violently. However, Qin Feng paused for a moment and then changed the topic. But even though you're a poor dog, you still have some value to me. How about this? I'll give you a way out. Qin Feng waved his sleeve, and a black light appeared. A contract filled with densely packed words appeared in his palm. Sign it, and I'll consider not eating dog meat hot pot. Really? When it heard that it wouldn't eat dog meat hot pot, Garm's lifeless eyes lit up. Its legs stopped twitching, and it stopped foaming at its mouth. It immediately turned over and snatched the contract from Qin Feng's hand. However, with just a glance, Garm's eyes were immediately fixed, and tears flowed from its eyes. It couldn't even close its mouth. First, after mutual discussion, Party A and Party B agreed that Party A would unconditionally respect and agree to the following conditions proposed by Party B, and must not openly violate the promise. Party A, blood-spotted giant dog Garm. Party B, Helm, Lord of the Underworld. Rule 1. Party A will unconditionally guard the gate of Helm's underworld for 100 million years. Without Party B's approval, Party A is not allowed to leave, not allowed to take leave, not allowed to sleep, not allowed to eat humans or gods, and not allowed to mate without permission. Rule 2. Party A must unconditionally respect His Highness Qin Feng, Lord of the Underworld, and must unconditionally serve His Highness Qin Feng. There must not be any complaints, disagreements, or curses in secret. Rule 3. Chapter 1667. Just as Qin Feng was dealing with the blood-spotted dog, Garm, who was stealing food. On the World Tree, the Asgard gods had already sensed the movements of the underworld of Heim. Let's talk about the World Tree of the Nordic world first. This World Tree's seed was a pie tree. It was planted by the god King Odin himself. It absorbed the power of the 3 holy springs and grew into a huge world tree. It was also called the Tree of the Universe, the Tree of Life. It was connected to the 9 realms. They were Asgard, where the Asgard gods lived; Midgard, where the humans lived; Niflheim, where the fog country was; Muspelheim, where the true fire country was; Jotunheim, home of the frost giant; Alfheim, home of the elves; Safathaven, home of the gnomes. There was also Vanaheim, home of the Vanaheim god. Finally, there was the underworld of Heim controlled by Qin Feng. The climate of the 9 realms was different in each world. For example, the underworld of Heim in Qin Feng's hands was cold and foggy. It was shrouded in eternal night and filled with undead. Another example was Niflheim, home of the fog country. It was a pure world of ice and snow. It was filled with endless cold wind and was deathly silent. Another example was Alfheim, home of the elves. It was flourishing and spring all year round. It was filled with all kinds of flowers. In the Nordic world, some of the powerful gods of fate said that the World Tree shared the vicissitudes of the world. In fact, it was the same in the legends. The World Tree collapsed. The Asgard gods attracted the twilight of the gods and destroyed most of it. But that was not necessarily the case. At least in the original Nordic world, there were no gods of Ospren, gods of heaven, gods of Egypt, or some other powerful gods. This huge world had changed. As for why the underworld of Heim was discovered, it had to be explained from the changes in the past 100 years. As the order of the underworld of Heim was sorted out by Qin Feng, the divine power of death in the underworld of Heim increased. The attraction to the souls of some of the dead in the world became stronger. Some of the souls in the divine realm of the main gods were unavoidably attracted and forcibly returned to the final land. All kinds of phenomena showed that there was a change in the underworld of Heim. What's more, in the past 100 years, Qin Feng had refined many monsters and made them deliberately to cause trouble in the underworld of Heim. Asgard. Most of the gods of the Asa gods had gathered around a round mahogany table that could accommodate thousands of people. Among them were the father of gods, Odin, and god-queen Frigga. Most of the 12 chief gods had arrived. Thor, the thunder god, goddess of earth and harvest, Sif, war god Tyr, fire god Loki, Niold, the god of the coastal sea, as well as his 2 children, the god of fertility, Frey, and the goddess of war, Freya. The god of coastal waters, Nold, was the leader of the Vanir gods. A long time ago, the Warner god clan and the Asa god clan were sworn enemies. Both clans had fought for supremacy in the world, and countless lesser gods had died. Later, after a long and drawn-out war, the 2 sides who were tired of fighting and had suffered countless casualties signed a peace treaty. As a guarantee, they provided Nold, Freyr, and Freya as hostages, and obtained the foolish god Hænir and the wise old man Mimir from the Asgard gods. Although they were thrown over as hostages, these 3 chief gods of the Warner god clan were not ostracized by the Asa god clan. However, they were treated with importance and were conferred as 3 of the 12 chief gods, sharing the authority to rule the gods with the Father of gods. At this moment, the gods in the celestial palace were no longer as happy as before. The celestial palace was shrouded in a layer of dark clouds. Even the various delicacies, glittering jewels, and beautiful goddesses on the mahogany table could not sweep away the heavy clouds above the celestial palace. Not long ago, the eldest son of the Father of Gods, Baldur, the body of light, suddenly fell into a deep sleep and could not be awakened. The Father of Gods and the God-Queen couple spent a great deal of effort to awaken him, but Baldur said that he dreamed of his destined death. This was a great omen. The Father of Gods found the 3 goddesses of fate under the world tree. The 3 goddesses of fate were the descendants of the giant Nalvi and were born to control fate. Fate was supreme, and this rule was difficult for even the most supreme beings to resist. The 3 goddesses were Wyrd, Beludandi, and Shikoti. They represented the past, present, and future. They lived in the 3 springs that separated heaven and earth, near the Black Scout Spring. Their main task was to weave the web of fate and draw water from the Black Scout Spring every day to water the World Tree. This made the World Tree forever green. Of course, they also had another task, which was to guard the apples of youth hanging on the branches of the World Tree to prevent people from stealing them. The 3 goddesses of fate had a special status, and even the Father of Gods, Odin, had to respect them. The 3 goddesses of fate told the Father of Gods, Odin, about Baldur's destined fate. Is there no other way? On the throne, the noble god-queen Frigg's face was filled with worry and bitterness. Although she was high and mighty, as the god-queen of the Asa god clan that ruled the 9 realms and all living things in the universe, she could not save her own child now. Beside her, the Father of Gods, the dignified Odin, looked exhausted. Compared to his many sons of gods, the god of light Baldur had always been regarded as his future successor, the successor of the king of gods. The god of light Baldur was indeed very outstanding, far surpassing the god of darkness, Hodel, who was born with the ability to control laws, and the god of thunder, Thor, who was born with the ability to control lightning. He was handsome, passionate, and charismatic, and had an affinity and dominance that the other sons of gods did not have. With him as the successor, the Asa god clan's glory would definitely be further enhanced in the next era of gods. On both sides of the round mahogany table, the Asa gods had different expressions. Some were indifferent, some were gloating, some were regretful, and some were smiling bitterly. Of course, some were gloating. For example, the red-haired god of fire, Loki, had always been dissatisfied and even hostile toward Baldur for being able to wield the powerful divine title of light. Of course, Loki did not reveal such an expression. Otherwise, it would easily incur the wrath of the father of all beings, Odin. The single eye of the father of gods was filled with a certain expression. The god of light Baldur could not die. Not only was he the successor of the king of gods, but he was also a key figure in the three goddesses of fate and the giant of wisdom's language, the key figure in starting the twilight of the gods and igniting the conflict between the Asa gods. Once the god of light Baldur fell, and the world tree fell into darkness, the twilight of the gods would be unavoidable. "I'm going to the netherworld of Helm." On the side, God Queen Frigg suddenly raised her head, her eyes shining. The netherworld of Helm, death god Hull, wielded the power of death and the power of the end of all things. If she could refuse Baldur's death, perhaps Baldur's nightmare would never come true. Chapter 1668. Although death god Hull was one of the Asgard gods, to some extent, he was equivalent to a small duke. Death god Hull was a tough nut to crack. He wouldn't give face to anyone other than the Asgard gods. Many powerful overgods glanced at the fire god, Loki, who was sneering at them from the side. Fire god Loki had many children. Most of them were monsters, and they didn't respect him at all. But there was one exception. That was death god Hull. She was one of the few obedient children of the god of death Hull and the god of fire Loki. If Loki made a move, there might be hope. But the father of gods had always been proud. He might not lower his head to this fire god. Before the god of light was born, the father of gods, Odin, had promised to give the god of light to Loki. Not long ago, the Asgard gods had sent all of Odin's children away. The demon wolf Fenrir had even been locked up. The god Queen Frigga had some thoughts. Her gaze fell on the red-haired fire god Loki. Loki's expression didn't change, as if he didn't see the god queen's hopeful gaze. He lowered his head and gently picked at his fingernails with a gorgeous knife. A faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. Seeing this, the god queen looked at the majestic father of gods, Odin. Odin didn't seem to see the god queen's gaze. "All right, I'm going to the underworld of Helm now." His burly divine body stood up and looked around at the Aesir gods around the round mahogany table. His eyes glanced at the fire god Loki, who had an indifferent expression. A trace of dissatisfaction flashed through his heart. Odin turned around and went straight to the underworld of Helm. The 9 worlds above the world tree could be roughly divided into the upper 3 levels, the middle 3 levels, and the lower 3 levels. Asgard, Vanaheim, and the elven kingdom Alfheim were all in the upper 3 levels. The middle 3 levels had worse weather than the upper 3 levels. They were the human world Midgard, the giant kingdom Jotunheim, and the dwarf kingdom Wartheim. The underworld of Helm, the misty kingdom Niflheim, and the fire kingdom Muspelheim were in the lower 3 levels. The lower 3 levels were famous for their harsh weather. Riding the 8-legged divine chariot, Odin appeared directly in the air above the river Styx in front of Helm's netherworld. There was a terrifying pressure coming from his body. The intense divine light even dispelled the darkness and gloomy clouds that had gathered above Helm's underworld for countless years. In fact, Odin was indeed quite powerful. Almost all of the priesthoods of the gods could be found in him. The blood-spotted hound, who had just signed an unequal treaty, stared at the divine king, who was shining with divine light. He was so ferocious that the blood-spotted hound revealed a rare trace of respect. The gate of Hull opened, and a black-robed goddess, surrounded by several servants, walked out of the gate. She looked at the god-king of the underworld, who was looking down at Heim from the clouds. She didn't have much respect on her face. She only bowed slightly to Odin to show her respect to the god-king of the Aesir gods. "I can hear sounds of celebration coming from your palace. Can you answer me? What are you celebrating?" After a moment of silence, Odin said in a deep voice. Her said after a moment of silence. "The world of death is about to welcome a very distinguished guest, so we have prepared a feast, singing and dancing, and delicious food to welcome the arrival of the distinguished guest? Odin's face darkened. Is it Balder, my poor child? Her was silent, obviously tacitly agreeing. Odin's eyes flashed with a thunderous majesty. Balder is the successor of the Aesir gods, the future king of the gods. I need you to swear that the world of death and the underworld will not accept Balder. A trace of coldness flashed in Hare's eyes. God King, I advise you not to do so. You want to refuse me? Odin's eyes flashed with a fierce light. He had the intention to kill. Anyone who dared to hurt Balder would be an enemy of the Aesir gods. An overwhelming pressure fell on her. Hare's expression didn't change as he raised his head. God King, life and death are arranged by fate. Do you really think it's a good thing that the world of death doesn't accept Balder's soul? Odin's expression changed slightly, and in an instant, he recovered from the fear and anger in his heart. Death was sometimes not the end. What if Balder's soul was destroyed? In just an instant, Odin's originally rather valiant divine body had a trace of old age. After a moment, Odin raised his head, his gaze cold. I want you to swear that the world of death will not take the initiative to hurt Balder. As you wish, God King. I, her, swear that I will never take the initiative to hurt Balder. Her nodded. Odin's cold gaze slightly restrained, but he still glanced at her indifferently, disgust flashing in his eyes. No matter what, the attitude of the Aesir gods towards the monster children of the fire god Loki would not change. The dignified and handsome Aesir gods would never accept such a freak and ferocious existence. Riding the eight-legged divine chariot, Odin turned and left. The divine light dissipated in the cold sky above the underworld of Heim, and gradually darkness and coldness once again enveloped this gloomy hell. Her looked coldly in the direction that Odin had left, then turned and returned to the death god palace. The next moment, she turned into a black light and fell into the body of a black-robed figure on the throne. The death god heard just now was obviously Qin Feng's transformation. He had only cultivated the 72 transformations and comprehended the supreme creation. Odin didn't check carefully, but he was deceived. Regalic, huh? On the throne, Qin Feng raised his head and looked in the direction of Asgard with a sneer in his eyes. If the Aesir gods didn't wither, how could their world of death prosper? How could they replace them, completely integrate into this world, and become the new supreme god? At this time, as the underworld of Heim grew stronger, the world of death expanded, and the radiance of the god king of death gradually appeared on his body. The god king godhood and the god king Hades godhood gradually condensed and appeared for him. In the human world, many mortal countries had already begun to worship the death gods. Qin Feng promoted 4 subordinate gods in the world of death. They were the god of bones born of the skeletons, the god of undead knights of the death knights, the god of hatred of the abominations, and the lich dragon god born of the Dracolic. These 4 gods were his claws and fangs. After that, there were 8 oracles, each in charge of a part of the world of death, such as soul catcher, worry, hunger, rage, destruction, greed, and conspiracy. The 4 subordinate gods were in charge of governing the world of death, while the 8 oracles were in charge of spreading the name of the world of death in the mortal world. When Qin Feng was busy governing the world of death, the god of light couldn't escape the fate of death in the end. Chapter 1669. When Odin returned to Asgard and learned that death god Hul was unable to prevent Balder's death, god Queen Frigga was unwilling to accept it. Frigga had several sons: war god Tyr, darkness god Hodel, and god's emissary Helmud, but light god Balder was her favorite son. The god empress was not willing to watch her son fall into the abyss. I can't let Balder be harmed. For this reason, God Empress Frigga asked the God King for the right to command the heroic army under her command. Thus, she ran all over the 9 realms and used the God King's supreme authority to change the rules, ordering all beings and gods to swear an oath not to harm the future successor of the Asur gods, Balder. If they disobeyed, they would become enemies with Asgard. This included the 12 Asgard gods, the Vanir gods, the Elven kingdom, the House of Dwarves, and even the locked-up fire god Loki's monster children. In the world of death, the God Queen also sent an emissary to force Death God Hull and his emissaries to not harm the future leader of Asgard. Qin Feng saw this and did not refuse. As a supreme being of another world, he was also well aware of the power of fate in this world. It was a powerful force that even the Supreme could not resist. The supreme gods could barely resist the corrosion of fate, but they could not change the general trend of the world. They might be able to resist it, but it was not something that could be changed suddenly. It required a long period of planning and guidance. Qin Feng did not want to do anything to resist fate at the moment. At least, he did not want to attract the attention of the other supreme gods before he completely integrated into this huge world. Everything swore an oath not to harm the future leader of Asgard, the god of light Balder. The only exception was the mistletoe sprout growing to the east of the martyr's palace. It was too weak and should not be able to harm anyone. Sure enough, after the gods swore an oath, Balder's nightmare dissipated, and the dark clouds that shrouded the entire celestial palace completely dissipated. Fire god Loki had always been brooding over Balder's succession to the position of god of light, and he also hated the fate of his children. He discovered the secret that the mistletoe sprout had not swore an oath. The next day, news of Balder's death spread from the celestial palace. When the beings of the 9 great worlds swore not to hurt Balder, the gods were happy for him. They also tried to throw weapons at him. As expected, they couldn't hurt the god of light. But when Hodel threw a mistletoe tree at it, it turned into a sword. After being hit by this sword, Balder fell almost immediately. The fact that the younger twin brother had killed his own blood relative was a huge scandal in the Aso divine clan. It was something that many people found hard to accept. Although there were many scandals involving the gods of the Aso gods never killed each other. Odin, the father of all gods, was enraged. If not for the gods' persuasion against killing blood relatives, the god of darkness, Hodel, might have been killed on the spot. Even so, the god of darkness, Hodel, was temporarily deposed and placed under house arrest in the Garden of the Gods. At the same time, although the fire god Loki was bewitching and using Hodel to kill Balder, there was no wall in the world. Odin soon became suspicious. Although the god of darkness was born with the rule of darkness and was one of the 12 main gods, the god of light, Balder, controlled light, which naturally countered Hodel's dark divine power. How could the god of darkness, Hodel, kill Balder with a weak mistletoe tree? While Odin was secretly investigating the cause of Balder's death, Qin Feng had already quietly left the world of death. In this mysterious world, besides condensing a godhood, one could also indirectly absorb the world's origin power. In fact, there were other ways to obtain the origin power. For example, searching for treasures that contained the origin power. For example, before the primordial origin, the three-eyed chaos spring. Each of the 3 chaos divine springs contained extremely precious chaos essences. Qin Feng had long set his eyes on the three-eyed chaos spring. At this time, the Aso gods were fighting among themselves. While the gods were distracted, he quietly searched for traces of the three-eyed chaos spring. The three-eyed chaos spring were Wagmir, Mimir, and Udar. The location of the chaos spring, which contained the chaos origin power, was not a secret in the Aso divine clan. They were at the foot of the world tree, providing water for it. The first thing Qin Feng wanted to steal was the Mimir spring. As for why he didn't steal the other 2 chaos springs, the reason was very simple. The other 2 chaos springs were guarded by ruthless people. Qin Feng had long been familiar with the trick of being a thief. Among the three-eyed chaos springs, Only the Mimir spring had no guardian. Oh, it should be said that there was no guardian now. There had been one before, and it had been a very powerful guy, but he had been tricked to death by Odin, the father of the gods. Rumor had it that the Mimir spring was the spring of wisdom. The spring water of the Mimir spring was full of knowledge and wisdom. It possessed knowledge about everything that had happened in the entire world and the 9 worlds, and it was all fused in this clear and transparent spring water. Thus, no matter who it was, whether they were gods, elves, giants, dwarves, or humans, as long as they drank the spring water of the Mimir spring, they would become both knowledgeable and wise. However, there was a giant who was guarding the spring, not letting any gods or giants get close to it. This giant was called Mimir, also known as the Giant of Wisdom. In the world, there had never been a creature who could drink a mouthful of the spring water of Mimir, except for this giant himself. Every evening, when the gorgeous sunset reflected the surface of the spring like a poem or a painting, old Mimir would use a delicate horn cup to draw a cup of the spring water of knowledge and wisdom, and slowly enjoy it himself. As time passed, the giant Mimir grew older and older, but the cup of spring water every day also made him smarter and wiser. He knew everything that had happened, was happening, and would happen in the world. Once, Odin came to the Mimir spring during his travels and happened to meet Mimir, who was holding a horn cup to draw water from the spring. Looking at the clear spring water of Mimir, Odin's heart was aroused with a strong desire to pursue knowledge and wisdom. "O wise Mimir, please let me drink a mouthful of this spring water of knowledge and wisdom," Odin said. "Impossible." Mimir refused him without hesitation. "O Mimir, knowledge and wisdom are so precious, and I, Odin, am so determined to pursue them. O Mimir, I am willing to exchange everything I have for a precious spring water to increase my wisdom." The old giant listened to Odin's words and was a little moved. Finally, he said, "Odin, you troublesome god, if you can sacrifice one of your eyes and throw it into the spring water, I will let you drink as much of this spring water of knowledge and wisdom as you want." Odin was a little hesitant now. But soon he made a decision and carefully dug out his right eye and threw it into the spring water of Mimir. The eye fell steadily to the bottom of the spring and opened up in the spring water of knowledge and wisdom. Through the clear spring water, it could see everything that had happened in the universe and everything that would happen in the future. Odin then drank a lot of the spring water of Mimir and became more knowledgeable and wise from then on. Although he lost an eye and was often called One-Eyed Old Man or One-Eyed Old Man, it was also because of his superior wisdom that he finally defeated the original god and became the king of the gods and the father of the gods. Perhaps because one of his eyes had been at the bottom of the water for a long time, Odin also gained the ability to see and absorb knowledge and wisdom from the past, present, and future. Of course, after losing an eye, Odin also held a grudge against the stingy wisdom giant Mimir. Later, taking advantage of the exchange of hostages with the Vanir gods, he tricked the wisdom giant Mimir to the Vanir gods as a hostage. In the end, Mimir was tragically killed by the Vanir gods. Chapter 1670. Here, I want to explain the origin of the Vanir gods and the origin of the conflict with the Aesir god. After the Great War, Odin took the lead in defeating the frost giants and the fire giants, dominating the world and establishing the supreme position of the Aesir gods. But it was not without opponent. At the beginning of the world's birth, Vanaheim on the western coast also gave birth to a natural god with divine power. This was the Vanir gods. The Vanir gods were led by the sea god Niold. He was one of the 12 main gods of the Aesir gods, the current god of the coastal sea. Some said that Niold was the descendant of the wise ancient gods, and there were also rumors that Niold and the giant Shaki's daughter, Skadi, who was killed by the Aesir gods, were siblings. Shaki was a mountain giant who lived in Jotunheim, so it seemed that the Vanir gods also had giant blood. The war between the two races originated from a dispute over the rules of heaven and earth, or a premeditated, organized test. Among the Vanir gods, there was a powerful goddess called Gulvig. This powerful goddess, like Odin, the origin of the gods of Asgard and the father of the gods, was also an ancient god. She was the origin of the gods of Vanir. This goddess went to Asgard to discuss which of the two gods was greater and more worthy of people's worship. The Aesir gods sensed the thoughts of this powerful goddess and thought that she came with bad intentions, so Odin threw the spear Gungnir at her to declare war. Gungnir was a 10,000-year-old weapon in the hands of Odin, the father of the gods. Its raw material was a trunk of the world tree, which had terrifying divine power. Could easily kill the gods. Odin used this spear and divine fire to kill the goddess Gulvig as many as 3 times, but Gulvig could be resurrected each time. The father of the gods could not kill the goddess Gulvig, and similarly, the origin of the Vanir gods, the goddess Gulvig could not do anything to the father of the gods, Odin. The war lasted for a long time, and both sides suffered a lot of losses. Countless small gods, new gods, and even gods fell. Both sides were tired of this war, so they decided to make peace and exchange hostages. The 3 hostages that the Vanir gods exchanged were the leader of the Vanir gods, Niold, and the children of Niold and his sister, Nasuz, Frey and Freya. In this regard, the Vanir gods were quite honest. They offered up the current leader of the gods, as well as their children. But from this, it could be seen that the god of the ocean, Nold, wasn't doing well in the Vanir divine race. The one who started the battle was the origin goddess Gulvig, and the one who took the blame was actually him. As the leader of the Vanir god race, he had been abandoned by the god race and thrown away like trash. He had even lost 2 of his children. Although the 3 of them were the 12 main gods of Asgard, compared to the sincerity of the Vanir gods, the Aesir gods' exchange of hostages was a little perfunctory. The 2 hostages were Odin's brother Haniel and the wisdom giant Mimir. Even though this god was Odin's brother and was very handsome, he was actually a retard. His personality was dull, his brain was slow, and he was especially bad at talking. There was also the giant of wisdom, Mimir. After losing an eye, Odin finally found a chance to take revenge on the old giant who had exchanged his eye. After Haniel and Mimir came to Vanaheim, they were very welcomed by the Vanir gods at first. The name of the god king's brother seemed to carry a lot of weight. The Vanir gods also let Haniel become a small leader with real power in the Vanir god. But the Vanir gods soon found clues. It seemed that on all occasions, the old giant Mimir was helping Haniel, answering all kinds of questions he raised. And once Mimir was gone, Haniel, the tall and handsome brother of the god king, was like a fool, useless. The Vanir gods were very angry because of this, feeling that they had been fooled and deceived by the Aesir gods. But Haniel was the brother of the god king, so he couldn't be killed. But to the wisdom giant Mimir, that old man, there was no such taboo. The Vanir gods found an opportunity to cut off the head of the wisdom giant Mimir and sent someone to send it to Asgard to show their strong anger and injustice. After the Aesir gods in the immortal palace received the head of the wisdom giant Mimir, many of the Aesir gods were very angry at the Vanir gods for doing this, but there was nothing they could do. At this time, the frost giants were causing trouble, and the Aesir gods were unwilling to start another war. This matter was left unsettled at this point. But the father of the gods was very happy to see the wisdom giant killed. Firstly, he had avenged the loss of his eye, and secondly, the smartest of the 9 realms, the old giant who claimed to be able to see the past, present, and future, was gone. He could monopolize the fountain of wisdom and draw on the wisdom of the fountain of wisdom alone. Of course, the narrow-minded god king did not let go of the wisdom giant Mimir. He smeared the wisdom giant's head that the Vanir gods had sent back with various herbs, smeared all kinds of strange medicinal juices, and secretly refined it with a divine spell. He gave Mimir's head power so that it could talk to him and dig out all kinds of secrets that Mimir knew. In short, he treated Mimir's head as an old story, and used it to relieve boredom and amuse himself in his spare time. Passing through the end of the Heim underworld, Qin Feng directly passed through the country of true fire, Muspelheim, and went directly to the roots of the world tree. The sunset here was gorgeous, and the flowers were like brocade. This red sunset fell, and this place was like a huge garden. After Mimir's death, the Fountain of Wisdom lost its guardian. In order to prevent other creatures from mistakenly entering here, or to prevent other gods from stealing the Fountain of Wisdom, absorbing wisdom, and threatening Odin's rule, the Father of the Gods sealed this place with a divine spell, and arranged a giant eagle here to build a nest on a branch of the world tree, secretly guarding the Fountain of Wisdom. Qin Feng's figure changed, and he came under the tree. He first saw the giant nest on a trunk of the world tree. A golden eagle squinted in the nest, its golden feathers awe-inspiring. Qin Feng smiled faintly, and among the 72 transformations, a kind of magic appeared in his mind. With a wave of his sleeve, a faint golden light appeared and turned into a small bug. Like a stream of light, it entered the body of the giant golden eagle. Whoosh! After a while, the golden eagle began to fall asleep. This was a sleepy bug. This kind of magic was necessary for stealing, killing, and arson. Even if a Lord God was hit by it, he would be confused and fall asleep. Seeing this, Qin Feng landed under the tree. The divine spell of Odin, the father of the gods, could not stop him at all. A faint golden light appeared around Qin Feng, and Odin's divine spell was silently melted by the golden light. Like a drop of water, an ancient and primitive divine spring appeared in front of Qin Feng. Chapter 1671. Gulp, gulp, gulp. The ancient divine spring bubbled, emitting a melodious sound. It was like the voices of many fairies in the immortal palace, pleasant to the ears. Taking a deep breath, Qin Feng felt as though his primordial spirit was ascending. There seemed to be countless sparks of wisdom flowing through his nose and mouth into his primordial spirit. Faintly, Qin Feng could feel that the source of his primordial spirit was becoming stronger and stronger. His comprehension of the three heavens' laws of creation, space, and celestial Tao had deepened. Good stuff, good stuff. Qin Feng opened his eyes, and they shone brightly. It's useful. It's useful. The spring of wisdom's benefits to his Yuan spirit were beyond his imagination. Qin Feng sat down cross-legged and began to use his grand mist holy power to absorb the spring's origin of wisdom. His 10 fingers moved simultaneously, and a golden light enveloped the entire divine spring. Strands of spring water turned into a long dragon and entered Qin Feng's body. Qin Feng's movements were very subtle. He knew that one of Odin's eyeballs was still in the spring, so he was very careful. Qin Feng absorbed an endless stream of the spring of wisdom, refining the origin of wisdom and merging it into his Yuan spirit. Like rain after a long drought, his Yuan spirit absorbed the origin of wisdom and rapidly grew stronger. Sparks of wisdom collided in his Yuan spirit. First, the innate creation laws were rapidly approaching perfection. This kind of speed was beyond Qin Feng's imagination. In the past, when he tried to comprehend the innate creation laws, he always felt it was difficult, and endless. But at this moment, he felt as if he was sitting on a rocket. Inspiration flashed one after another, and the innate creation laws that he found difficult to comprehend in the past seemed easy now. The accumulated knowledge and wisdom in his Yuan spirit seemed to be continuously integrated in the spring water. While Qin Feng was secretly absorbing the spring of wisdom, Odin finally found out who had secretly murdered the god of light, Balder. This one-eyed king, who was full of wisdom, did not immediately take action. Although light god Balder's death was due to someone's instigation, the person who killed him was darkness god Hodel. Among the Aesir gods, gods were forbidden from killing each other. The Aesir gods believed that this kind of killing was extremely ominous and disgusting. Dying at the hands of one's loved ones was the greatest misfortune. Because of this, the dark god Hodel was spared from death. However, Odin was not willing to give up just like that. In his heart, he was absolutely unwilling to forgive this vicious child who had plotted against his elder brother. As a direct descendant, the god of light Balder was favored by the Aesir gods. He was also entrusted with the Cyclops king's blood, sweat, and tears. Balder was chosen by the Cyclops king to be his successor after he transcended the divine king and ascended to the supreme level during the main god's twilight. The most tragic thing in the world was when a white-haired person had to send off a black-haired person, especially when the black-haired person was murdered by another family member. Odin wasn't willing to let go of the dark god Hodel. However, the tragedy had already happened. He couldn't personally kill his unfilial son, Hodel. However, Odin had another way. He had obtained a part of the fable about the future from the female prophet, Vala. If he could marry the female giant Linda, he would have a chance to avenge the god of light, Balder. Linda was the princess of the Rossi king, Byrlin. Linda was very cold and indifferent to everything and everyone. The king only had this one daughter, but Linda showed no signs of falling in love or giving birth. This made the king very anxious. On the other side, Odin learned that his son with the female giant Linda could avenge the god of light, Balder. Thus, Odin used tricks and magic to deceive the king, approached Linda, and forced the female giant Linda to have sex with him. Then, she gave birth to the god of nature, Vale, the destined avenger. Vale grew Dishang on the first day of his birth. He hadn't even washed his body. The moment he landed on the ground, he picked up his bow and arrow and killed the dark god Hodel, who had been banished to a mountain. The Norse people hated killing their own people. Thus, Hodel killing Balder was the greatest misfortune for the Aesir gods. However, if the Aesir gods killed Hodel because of this, it would only bring about an even greater misfortune. Of course, they couldn't let anyone other than the Aesir gods kill Hodel. Thus, Vale, who had only been born for a day and hadn't washed up, could be considered Odin's family. This could avoid the taboo of the Aesir gods to the greatest extent. Although the gods were shocked by the fall of the dark god Hodel, one of the 12 main gods, after learning the identity of the god of nature, Vale, they automatically chose to remain silent. The god of light, Balder, was extremely popular among the Aesir gods. His fall had a great impact on the Aesir gods. The gods had already criticized the god of darkness, Hodel. On the contrary, the god of darkness, Hodel, the main god who was born to control the law of darkness, was not liked by the gods because of his power of darkness. When the god of darkness, Hodel, fell, the roots of the world tree absorbed the spring of wisdom. At this time, among the 3 laws of heaven and earth, Qin Feng had completely perfected the innate creation. The innate universe law was rapidly approaching perfection. Feeling the violent vibration of the law of heaven and earth, Qin Feng sneered inwardly. The 12 main gods of the Aesir gods represented the future of the Aesir gods, as well as the gathering of the gods' fate. The fall of the god of light, Balder, represented the destruction of light and the shroud of darkness. The main god of darkness, Hodel, fell once again. The 2 wings of light and darkness of the Aesir gods completely collapsed, and their fate was greatly damaged. Following the fall of the Aesir gods, the many main gods fell one by one, and the shackles above their heads collapsed one by one. Qin Feng saw that it would not be long before the light of the world of death completely shrouded the 9 great world, and he would also use this to achieve the position of the paramount god of death, and even go one step further, becoming one with the 3 corpses, surpassing the ordinary paramount god. Qin Feng calmed his heart and once again looked at the spring of wisdom under the roots of the world tree. At this time, he had already absorbed a small portion of the spring of wisdom's source of wisdom, and there was still a large portion left. He had to completely refine it in a short time. After taking revenge for the god of light, Balder, the ship of death, the gods then placed Balder's corpse on the deck of his spirit boat, chopped off many pine branches, and filled it with weapons and funeral offerings. What Odin gave was his golden ring, Draupnir, which could duplicate himself. Just as the gods were sending Balder off, the wife of the god of light, Nanna, committed suicide because she was too sad. The gods also put Nanna on the ship and killed Balder's horse and dog to be buried with them. Then, Odin brought the angry gods to find the mastermind of this tragedy, Loki. Loki, my brother, tell me, when did your heart become so vicious? In the immortal palace, the gods gathered. The atmosphere in the immortal palace was almost frozen. In the main hall, the gods' gazes were either mocking, indifferent, angry, or cold as they looked at fire god Loki. Chapter 1672. Facing pairs of gloomy and unfriendly eyes. Brother Odin, do you still treat me as your brother? Loki laughed so hard that tears flowed out of his eyes. Odin frowned slightly, his one eye coldly looking at Loki. No, you've already forgotten. You've forgotten who killed the frost giant ancestor Ymir for you, and who helped you sit on the throne of the king of the gods. You've already forgotten your promise. You gave the priesthood of light that originally belonged to me to your most beloved Balder. You imprisoned my children in that dark place where there is no light. From the beginning to the end, I've misjudged you. You're selfish, greedy, and stingy. Even the black dwarf of Saphataven is more generous than you. Loki, you evil god, what right do you have to criticize the great king of the gods, the father of the gods, Odin? As the son of Odin, the god of poetry, wisdom, and eloquence, Bragi, was the first to stand up and berate him angrily. Loki turned around and looked at the god of poetry, wisdom, and eloquence and said word by word. Bragi, you cowardly Prince Charming, what right do you have to shout here? Everyone here has the right to stand here, but you, a coward, don't have the right? Loki, how dare you insult this god like this? Bragi's face was red, and he suddenly stood up from the throne. Loki glanced at him and sneered. Do you dare to deny your cowardice? Back then, the frost giant turned into an eagle and captured your wife, the goddess of youth, Eden, and the gods sent you to Solemnheim. Solemnheim is a place in Jotunheim. You were as timid as a quail, hiding in your temple and trembling. If it weren't for me, do you think Eden would have been able to return to your side? Bragi's eyes were bloodshot. That was the shame of his life. On the side, the goddess of youth, Eden, had an unnatural expression. She had been stripped naked by the frost giant, Siaji. She had almost been violated by that abominable giant. The gods looked at Loki with gloomy faces. Bragi was one of the 12 main gods of Aesir. Your Highness Blocky, you don't have to bother with an evil god. What happened back then was decided by the gods. If Loki hadn't deceived His Highness Eden with a scheme, His Highness Eden wouldn't have been caught off guard and wouldn't have fallen into that hateful frost giant Sia's trap and been captured. A tall ancient god said indifferently. Of the 12 prime gods, the former god of the ocean, the current god of the coastal sea, Nold. The former god King Vanir had always been respected by the gods of the Aesir gods. When he saw Blocky insulting Loki, he couldn't help but speak up. Loki's eyes were filled with mockery when he heard Niold's rebuke. Don't play the good guy here, Nold. Do you think no one knows about your dirty deeds? First, you slept with your sister, and then you were cheated on. You still have the face to stand among the gods of Aesir? Don't you feel ashamed? Nold's expression changed drastically. He stared at Loki, almost gnashing his teeth. This was almost his Achilles' heel. After being traded to the Aesir gods as a hostage of the god king of the Vanir gods, Nold had a marriage. After the frost giant was burned to death by the gods of Aesir because he stole the goddess of youth, Eden. The daughter of the frost giant, the goddess of winter, Skadi, came to Asgard to seek justice. The goddess of winter, Skadi, was a third-generation ancient god, but she controlled the power of winter and glaciers. Her priesthood was very powerful, and she was also a prime god. On that day winter arrived. The scenery was beautiful and picturesque, and the kingdom of the gods was filled with the power of winter snow. The gods tried to reconcile with her. They agreed to Skadi's request, to let her choose one of the gods to be her husband. But the gods also made a condition: she could only choose her husband based on their feet. Skadi originally wanted to choose the most handsome Balder, the deceased god of light, as her husband. She chose a pair of feet that she thought were the most perfect. She thought that such perfect feet should belong to Balder, but she chose the god of the ocean, Nold. This made Nold overjoyed. He had simply picked up a beautiful goddess for free. Of course, the goddess of winter, Skadi, might have been plotted against by the gods of Aesir, or was influenced by something. She actually chose to agree to the condition of choosing a husband and gave up revenge for her father. But Nold was not happy for long. Nold was a coastal sea god from the gods of Vanir, and he lived in Norton, Ship City. Skadi, as the goddess of winter, lived in Solemnheim in Jotunheim, the giant kingdom, which was the place where Sharki once hid the goddess of youth, Eden. Although the two were married, their interests were quite different. At first, they agreed to take turns living in the two places every 9 days or 3 days. But neither of them could adapt to the other's environment, and the marriage ended in a breakup. The natural gods were greatly influenced by their priesthood and divinity. Unlike some of the natural ancient gods in the primitive world, who had perfect control of the rules of heaven and earth, their minds were tough, and they were not, or very rarely, affected by the power of the rules of heaven and earth. Although the ocean and ice intersected, one was changeable, and the other was cold and cruel. These were two extremes, and it was difficult for them to be together, unless the two ancient gods could defeat the divinity and become the god-king. Soon after, the goddess of winter met the god of archery, Oriel. He was a prince charming who loved snow and hunting. He was the stepson of Thor, the god of thunder, and the son of the goddess of earth and harvest. Seeing that Nold, the god of the coastal sea, was speechless by Loki's rebuttal, a beautiful goddess shouted, "Loki, shut up! Everyone in the Aesir gods has the freedom to love, but none of the Aesir gods are like you, who turned into a mare and fooled around with a stallion. You even gave birth to an 8-legged divine colt, and the god got pregnant and gave birth to a child. This is a strange story." Loki's expression changed greatly, and a trace of fierceness flashed in his eyes. He looked at the beautiful goddess who had spoken, but his expression soon returned to normal. He looked at the goddess with a sneer and laughed strangely. "Freya, the goddess of war, Nold's daughter, you shameless bitch. When it comes to strange stories, no one can compare to you. The taste of being a dark dwarf is pretty good. Being locked up in a cave by 4 dark-skinned and extremely ugly dark dwarves for 4 days and nights. Tell me, should I praise you for being good at playing or for having a unique taste?" Freya was the goddess of love, the goddess of war, and the goddess of magic. She was the god with the highest level of magic in Asgard. It was said that Odin's magic was learned from Freya after she came to Asgard. Freya and Frey were the children of Niold and his sister, Nasuz. They had inherited their parents' tradition, or rather, the chaotic tradition of the Vanir race. They had an indescribable relationship, but they did not marry or have any children. Freya's husband was the god of summer, Nold. They had a pair of beautiful and lovely daughters. Gods, giants, mortals, and even dwarves coveted Freya's beauty, but her husband, Nold, was not faithful in love. He liked to travel more than Freya, and whenever he was tired of a place, he would leave without saying goodbye. On a journey to find Nold, Freya saw 4 dwarves making a very beautiful necklace called Bricht Jarman. This was a very special necklace. It had no other power, but it could be continuously strengthened and increase its own charm. Freya wanted this necklace very much when she saw it. She asked the dwarves how much they could sell it to her for, but the dwarves were more lustful than greedy. They said that they would not sell it for any price, and that the price for this necklace was to sleep with the 4 of them for 1 night. Freya slept with the 4 dwarves in the cave for 4 nights. Chapter 1673. Several main gods had unnatural expressions. The goddess of war, Freya, was pale. She gritted her teeth and looked at Loki with her beautiful eyes, wishing she could tear him to pieces. The god of fertility, Freyr, also had a gloomy expression. He was the elder brother who had had physical contact with the goddess of war and had done something indescribable. He was also the main god of the elven kingdom in the 9 realms. His expression was gloomy. He couldn't be blamed for having sex with Freya. The Vanir gods were naturally open-minded, but they didn't have as many rules as the Aesir gods. Needless to say, the god of the coastal sea was even more embarrassed. The Aesir gods all looked at Loki with gloomy expressions. This time, no one stood up to debate with Loki. Loki was the brother of god King Odin and a first-generation ancient god. He had lived longer than them and loved to gossip. Who didn't have a bit of privacy? Who could guarantee that their secrets hadn't been learned by the evil god Loki? On the throne, the god Queen Freyr wanted to speak several times, but the rebuke was stuck in her throat. She also had a past that she couldn't bear to look back on. As the goddess of love, the goddess of the sky and earth, Freyr was mainly in charge of marriage and family. Although she was famous for being virtuous, she also had a shortcoming. She had an uncontrollable greed for gold, silver, and jewels. She had always used jewels and gold to decorate her palace, never satisfied. Once, she stole a piece of gold from Odin's statue. Because Odin had carved a divine incantation in the Luna language on the statue, he could tell the thief's name. Thus, Freyr went all the way and shattered the statue. Odin was so angry that he left Asgard. When Odin wasn't around, Odin's 2 brothers pretended to be Odin, the other 2 sons of the primordial ancient god Boel, and slept with Frigga because the 3 brothers looked the same. 7 months later, when the frost giants attacked, the 2 Odins couldn't resist the attacks of the frost giant army because they didn't have Odin's divine power. Only then did Freyr vaguely discover them. This matter was extremely secretive, but the god Queen Freyr knew that it couldn't be hidden from Loki. She also had an indescribable affair with the stepson of the thunder god Thor, the goddess of winter's husband, the god of archery. But the more it was like this, the more the god Empress hated Rocky. Not only the god Empress, but the other gods of Asa, whose wounds had been exposed by Rocky, were also staring at Rocky with gloomy expressions. Their eyes were filled with bone-chilling coldness. Kill him. The Aesir clan doesn't need such a despicable and shameless god, said one of the deities with a cold expression. She was a goddess. She was the goddess of winter, the wife of the god of archery, Uriel, and the ex-wife of the lord of the coastal sea, Niold. Her father, the frost giant, had died at the hands of Loki. Rumble! An earth-shattering bolt of lightning shot out, and a terrifying bolt of lightning struck Loki, who was in the center of the hall. There was a loud bang. The figure of the fire god Loki turned into dust. A burly figure covered in lightning appeared in the hall. Among the 12 lords, Odin's son, the lord of thunder, Thor, had a bolt of lightning returned to his hand. It was the world-shaking divine artifact, Thor's hammer. Thor's face was also filled with killing intent toward Rocky. He knew very well that this bastard Rocky had seduced his wife, the goddess of earth and harvest, Sif. After being cuckolded, he had long wanted to kill this bastard Rocky. Rumble! Above the huge celestial palace, a cloud of death shrouded it, but in an instant, the cloud of fire erupted like a funnel. Within the fire of the celestial palace, Rocky's red hair fluttered in the wind. Hull! Seeing this, Thor let out an earth-shattering roar. Within the celestial palace, a cloud of death descended, and a strange human face appeared. Half of it was that of a beautiful young girl, while the other half was that of a rotten corpse, malevolent and decaying. Death god Hull. The Asur gods looked at this ghostly face with gloomy expressions. Thor, you don't need to do this. I said before that the world of death will not accept Rocky's soul. The giant ghostly face glanced at the gods. As the Lord of Death born in the world of death, Death god Hull could reject the arrival of death. This was a powerful ability that was close to destiny. As long as the Lord of Death didn't want any living being to die, no one could kill him unless their soul was completely destroyed. At this time, beside the spring of wisdom, green leaves danced and flowers bloomed in the garden. Qin Feng had already absorbed most of the wisdom origin in the spring of wisdom. Qin Feng didn't continue and cut off the root. Leaving behind a part of the wisdom origin, the spring of wisdom would continue to gather the gods' wisdom and strengthen it. After absorbing the wisdom origin, Qin Feng's laws of creation, space, and death were all perfected. He also grasped the law of wisdom at the same time. The only thing left was to integrate the last innate celestial Tao law and complete the three-corpse fusion. Oh, maybe this couldn't be called the three-corpse fusion anymore. The three-corpse fusion was the fusion of the three laws of heaven and earth, strengthening the innate celestial Tao law that he created. Qin Feng had already mastered more than 3 laws of heaven and earth. The laws of creation, space, death, wisdom, and celestial Tao, a total of 5. Among them, the laws of creation, space, death, and wisdom were the surface, and the branches of the 4 laws were the branches and leaf. The core was still the celestial Tao law. Qin Feng's current strength was undoubtedly many times stronger than when he first entered the Nordic world. He was now fully capable of suppressing his previous self. He could now be called the supreme of the 4 laws. Supreme of creation, supreme of space, supreme of death, and supreme of wisdom. However, he could only be considered as the supreme god of another world. Perhaps the laws of death and wisdom had already met the requirement. What Qin Feng needed now was an opportunity to completely integrate the 4 laws of heaven and earth into the celestial Tao law, perfect the celestial Tao law, and break through to the highest level. At this moment, the ghostly face formed by his divine sense appeared above the heavenly palace and looked at the gods calmly. At this moment, he had completely replaced Death God Hull and controlled the world of death. The gods thought that it was Death God Hull who rejected Loki's death and gave Loki an immortal body. In fact, it was Qin Feng, the supreme god of death and the ruler of the world of death, who helped Loki with the power of death. This was the biggest difference between the Nordic world and the Eldritch world. In other worlds, once one became a lord god, he would have an immortal body. His divine soul was entrusted to the laws of heaven and earth, making it difficult to kill him. Only beings of the same level who had mastered the laws of termination could kill him. But the Nordic world was different. Perhaps because of the different cultivation system, only those who had transcended fate could be truly immortal. Chapter 1674. Hypocritical and despicable Asur gods, you can't kill me. In the hall, fire god Loki's crazy laughter spread throughout the immortal palace. Qin Feng looked at Loki indifferently. His gaze fell on Odin, the father of all gods, who was sitting on the throne in front of the mahogany round table. Odin's aura was extremely brilliant and tyrannical, half-step supreme. Qin Feng's eyes were slightly surprised. The aura around him revealed a trace of power that transcended fate. Clearly, he had touched the threshold of the supreme realm and transcended fate. If he could break the fate of Legaruk, twilight of the gods, he might be able to ascend to the supreme realm and break free from the shackles of fate. He sat on the throne and ignored the gaze of the god of death, Hul. As he chanted, an ancient mantra appeared and turned into several golden chains that flew toward the god of fire, Loki. Odin, since you're doing it yourself, then let me see how much you've improved over the years. Loki's expression was cold. He waved his sleeve, and boundless flames appeared around him. Balls of flames flew fiercely toward the golden chains. The scorching heat was terrifying enough to incinerate all world. In the palace, the faces of the Aesir gods changed drastically. Fire god Loki's strength was indeed far above the Aesir gods. Within those balls of flames, even the 12 core gods felt that their divine bodies could be easily melted. Fire god Loki had already grasped most of the precepts of heaven and earth. Similar to Odin, fire god Loki's strength had also reached the half-step supreme realm. In the Aesir gods, except for Odin, the king of gods, the other core gods were no match for such earth-shattering power. Rumble! In the next moment, accompanied by an earth-shattering explosion, a divine spear pierced through the sky like thunder and nailed fire god Loki in the distance. Loki let out an extremely painful roar. Odin! His body was surrounded by boundless flames, and the surging divine power of fire vibrated. Asgard, where the palace was located, shook violently as if billions of volcanoes were roaring. The divine spear nailed him to the ground. The divine spear Gunnil was refined by Odin using the essence of a section of the world tree. It possessed world-shaking power. Fire god Loki couldn't break free. Poochie! The pale golden divine chain pierced through Loki's shoulder blade like lightning, locking him in place. Odin, you can't trap me! Loki looked up to the sky and roared. The divine power of fire in his body was like a volcano that split the sky and earth apart. The divine power vibrated and shook the world. The whole of Asgard seemed to be falling apart. Looking at this terrifying scene, all the gods were horrified. The fire god Loki's power was beyond the gods' imagination. On the throne, Odin's face was gloomy. He waved his sleeves and summoned thunder and lightning. Earth, water, wind, and fire bombarded Loki in succession. However, none of them could injure this terrifying god of fire. The deities looked at each other, and they all attacked together, bombarding him with all kinds of divine power. After a long while, the wind and clouds in the immortal palace dispersed. The atmosphere in the entire immortal palace was somewhat stagnant. Although Loki's body had been bombarded by the Aesir gods and turned to dust several times, he hadn't died. The gods looked at each other with gloomy faces. They were at their wits' end. Odin, I said that my strength is on par with yours. If you weren't the God King, you wouldn't be able to hurt me at all. But you can't trap me either. Loki's face was cold. The intense pain made his face contort. His eyes were like wolves, tigers, and leopards. It was as if the ferocity of all things appeared in his eyes. It was as if he was speaking word by word. When I get out, I'll make you despicable, hypocritical Aesir gods pay for the pain I've suffered today. On the throne, Odin's face was silent. His only eye looked at him coldly. After a moment, his gaze fell on the huge ghost face above the immortal palace. Qin Feng noticed Odin's gaze and was expressionless. The other gods also noticed this scene. Aesir and the other gods were furious and gloomy. If it wasn't for Death Hull's refusal, Loki would have been struck down by the power of the gods, and his soul would have been sent to Helm's underworld. Qin Feng noticed the anger on the faces of the gods. Qin Feng sneered inwardly. If these people killed Loki, how could Loki escape in the future? He would hate them and destroy the world. He would destroy the Aesir gods. His world of death was preparing to welcome the arrival of the Aesir gods. Helmont, bring Nalfo and Wally here. Helmont was the child of the god King Odin and the god Queen Freya. This son of the Odins was not as strong as the god of light, the god of darkness, or the god of thunder. But he was Odin's messenger, the messenger of the gods. He was in charge of communication and the important clergy of delivering messages. Odin, what do you want? If you have anything, come at me. Loki suddenly raised his head. His eyes were filled with fury. He struggled with all his strength, trying to break free from the golden chains and the suppression of the Gungnir divine spear. Odin's only eye was cold as he watched Loki struggle. Loki, you are the best at bewitching and scheming, showing off your mouth and driving a wedge between the gods. How many Aesir gods have suffered irreparable harm under your schemes? My two sons, the god of light Balder and the god of darkness Hodel, killed each other because of you. Today, I will let you experience the pain of your own skin. Father! Not long after, God's emissary Helmont brought the two cute little boys to the immortal palace. From afar, one could see a female giant hurrying towards the immortal palace as fast as lightning from the distant land. She looked worried. Loki was the son of the giant Fabudi and Laufey, and the latter was Odin's nurse. Thus, as a giant, Loki was able to join the Aesir gods and become one of the 12 main gods. Loki had several children in his life. Other than the 8-legged divine chariot, demon wolf Fenrir, Midgardian snake Jemingard, and death god Hull, there were 2 other monsters. There were also 2 normal ones. They were the 2 children of Loki and the female giants Sigurn, Nalfo and Wali. They each inherited the power of the fire god Loki. Compared to the few monsters who were indifferent to family love, Loki loved these 2 children the most. He even regarded them as pearls in his palm. Like Odin, who already knew about the existence of Regalak, Twilight of the Gods, Loki also knew part of Regalak's secrets. Seeing the pitiful children appear, Loki's hands trembled and turned into a roar. Odin, let them go. This has nothing to do with them. His mournful roar filled the entire immortal palace. He struggled with all his might like an injured beast. Odin's only eye was cold and indifferent. He ignored Loki's roar and pointed his finger at the 2 cute children. Wali directly turned into a ferocious and tyrannical yellow-brown hungry wolf. He turned his head and bit off half of his brother Nalfo's head, biting him to death in front of Loki. Chapter 1675. A Tragic Struggle. The boys' violent cries of pain after being attacked by a hungry wolf were endless. In the hall, the boys' blood dyed the bright red carpet red. Watching the 2 children and brothers kill each other with his own eyes, Loki's tears streamed down. The intense pain almost made his chest rise and fall like a sharp knife stabbing into it. He opened his mouth wide and tried to shout, trying to plead with the high and mighty king of the gods, but his throat was hoarse and he couldn't make any sound. Only hot tears rolled in his blood-red eyes. My child. Endless sadness, anger, and resentment rolled in his body, unable to be vented. He was like a volcano that was about to erupt. Loki, this is the pain you gave me. You bewitched Hodel to kill my poor child, Balder. Today, I will repay all the pain to you. I will let you see with your own eyes how it feels to watch 2 children kill each other and not be able to stop it. On the throne, Odin's single eye was calm. Loki raised his head. The tears in his eyes had turned into tears of blood. His expression was blank. In his blank eyes, there was only hatred that couldn't be washed away even if the sky collapsed. Odin. The 2 words seemed to be gritted from the roots of his teeth. The extremely bitter hatred flew out of Loki's body as if it was real. That terrifying hatred directly turned the blazing flames into a deep black. All the gods paled when they sensed this world-destroying resentment. Odin's single eye was pitch black as he looked at Loki indifferently. He knew that ordinary spells couldn't seal Loki. Only by using the flesh and blood of Loki's beloved blood relatives, the intestines of the child who had been bitten by the hungry wolf as a chain, and the child's resentment towards Loki to cast a curse could Loki be trapped. Odin knew that from this moment on, the fate of Legaruk, Lord of the Dusk, would roll in because of the seal of the Third Lord. It could no longer be stopped, and there was probably only one way to stop the arrival of the dusk of the gods. Mastery through comprehensive study, completely master the rules, and break through to the highest level. Next, Qin Feng witnessed how Loki was imprisoned with his own eyes. Odin showed that he used a piece of Loki's son, Nalfo's intestines, to make a rope with a divine spell to bind Loki. Then, he imprisoned him in a fan and tied him to a stone with a rope. Then, he summoned a huge venomous snake. It was a descendant of the original snake god. Its terrifying fangs contained a venom that could harm a god king. The venom dripped onto Loki's handsome face, corroding it. It did not stop for a single moment, causing Loki to suffer eternal pain. This sort of corrosion was irreversible, and had even corroded Rocky's foundation. Once he was injured, it would be difficult for him to recover in the future, and Rocky would be further and further away from the utmost being. Not long after, Loki's wife, the giant Sigma, arrived. Sigrun was heartbroken when she saw what had happened to her husband. However, she did not have enough power to free Loki from his pain, nor could she untie the rope made from her beloved son's intestines. She sat beside the bound Loki and made a cup out of the branches of the world tree to withstand the venom and prevent it from falling on her husband's face. Loki, who was full of resentment, could only let out angry roars again and again to vent his hatred. After Loki was sealed, the Aesir gods seemed to have regained their former peace. But in reality, a deep crack appeared among the Aesir gods. Loki made the past conflicts and scandals clear. Suspicion, dissatisfaction, and indifference grew among the gods. Many conflicts between the 12 main gods began to surface. The biggest change was undoubtedly the change in the climate of the 9 realms. The fall of the god of light, Balder, caused the world to lose its light and become dark. Loki was the god of fire, the world's last hope. With Loki sealed, there was no sunlight and fire. Some scattered gods of fire and gods of light were not enough to support the light of the world. Ice, snow, winter, and endless darkness began to envelop the 9 realms. This greatly benefited the ice gods and death-type divine spirits of laws. Qin Feng felt that the god of death was about to break through the peak of the god-king realm in a short 100 years. Qin Feng had a desire to immediately rush to Asgard and replace it. But soon Qin Feng's reason stopped this sudden impulse. There must be a supreme existence behind the Aesir gods. It was even possible that there was a supreme existence. The Nordic world was not as simple as imagined. It had already mutated. To be able to keep pace with the Chaos world, there must be some secret. For any world, Qin Feng was cautious and in awe. This was his way of doing things. He was bold but careful, and carefully sought confirmation. However, although he decided to continue hiding his identity, Qin Feng did not intend to continue holing up in the world of death. Of the 3 Chaos Springs, he had only obtained the origin of the Spring of Wisdom. The Spring of Wisdom had already given him such great benefit. One could imagine that if he absorbed the origin of the other 2 Chaos Springs, his strength would definitely be further improved. The remaining 2 Chaos Springs were called the Wuda Spring and Wagmir. The Wuda Spring was the first to be ruled out by Qin Feng. The Wuda Spring contained the power of fate. The famous 3 goddesses of fate of the Aesir gods guarded the Spring of Fate all day long. The 3 sisters respectively controlled the power of the past, present, and future. Qin Feng asked himself if he could beat these 3 goddesses, but it was extremely easy to expose himself. He would be exposed to the eyes of the many primordial gods hiding in the dark, or the Supreme. Then, the only thing left was Wagmir. Wagmir was the spring of ice and snow. It was in the northernmost Niflheim, country of fog. In a world of ice and snow, the spring water was bone-chilling and cold fog rose. According to what Qin Feng knew, in the spring, there was a very terrifying primordial poison dragon. That poison dragon was called Nighthawk. It entrenched there, biting the huge tree roots that stretched into the spring day and night. The poison dragon was born as a demon, and it tried to bite off the root of the universe tree and destroy the 9 great worlds. It was a primordial dragon of destruction. It was a tough nut to crack. Just as Qin Feng was preparing to seize the second holy spring, a special guest came to Asgard. It was a guest who seemed to be born from the light. His 6 pure white wings were incomparably sacred and holy. He was quietly received by Odin, the king of the gods, in a side hall. Emissary of the Lord of Light, the 6-winged angel of morning light, Lucifer. Has the Lord of Light finally made up his mind? Did he ask you to bring war or peace? Chapter 1676. In the huge palace, the person in front of the main hall turned around and looked at the handsome archangel who was brought into the palace. His single eye was filled with a hint of fear. It wasn't fear for the archangel in front of him. It was fear for the Lord of Light. The radiant paradise had appeared in the east of Asgard 10,000 years ago. It was from that moment that he knew there was an unimaginably huge region outside of the 9 realms. Although the radiant paradise had only been active in the east all these years, Odin had always been wary of the radiant paradise's strength. This could be seen from the 7 archangels under the Lord of Light's command. The 7 archangels were all God-King experts, especially the head of the 7 archangels, the 6-winged seraph, the 2nd angel of creation, the angel of dawn Lucifer. His strength almost surpassed that of the Asgard clan and his sworn brother, the fire god Loki. Half-step supreme. Honorable God King Odin, father of gods, our Lord has great respect for the Asgard clan. Our Lord is overjoyed that the Asgard clan is willing to ally with the radiant paradise. At the same time, he is also overjoyed that the 2 sides can work together to fight against the other gods. The angel of dawn Lucifer had an elegant smile on his face. There was an unusually familiar aura of light on his body. Even with the wisdom of the Father of Gods, the coldness in his single eye gradually eased. However, our Lord's conditions, the smile on Lucifer's handsome face softened slightly as he looked at the one-eyed king. The one-eyed king's single eye stiffened, as well as a hint of pain. Please believe in the sincerity of the Asgard clan. As long as you can help the Asgard clan survive the twilight of the gods, the Lord of Light can choose any of the 3 Chaos Holy Springs. Lucifer smiled and bowed slightly. In that case, Lucifer represents our Lord to thank the God King for his generosity. Soon, Lucifer's group was arranged by Odin to enter the kingdom of the Lord of Fertility, Frey, the home of elves, Alfheim. Watching Lucifer's group leave, the God King Odin's eyes flashed coldly in the huge palace. Twilight of the gods, Loki, I hope you don't seek your own destruction. The world tree, which was also the universe tree. Under a huge tree root, there was a pool of spring water as clear as a mirror. This spring was called the Wuda Spring, but it was much larger than the other 2 and looked like a lake. The water level of the Wuda Spring was as flat as a mirror, picturesque and poetic. The spring water emitted a pleasing white light, illuminating the entire shade of the universe tree. Its spring water was also incomparably holy, and the animals that lived on the surface of the water were snow white. At the beginning of the world, 2 mountain birds came to rest by the spring and played in the water. The holy water made their feathers as white as snow. Later, people called these animals swans. The 3 deities of fate resided next to the Crow Scout Spring. Just as the messenger of the Lord of Light, the angel of dawn, Lucifer, arrived at the immortal palace, the surface of the black fountain, which was originally as calm as a mirror, suddenly rippled. Fate has changed. The 3 fates instantly noticed the change in the water. The future has changed. Legaruk has undergone a distorted change. The goddess of the future, Shikit, who was in charge of the future, corrected him. The eldest goddess of fate, Ords, was in charge of the past, the second goddess, Verthandes, was in charge of the present, and the third goddess, Shikit, was in charge of the future. Ords was old and decrepit, while Verthandes was in her prime, youthful and lively. Shikit was covered in a mysterious veil, not revealing the truth. She held the scroll of the future in her hand, but never opened it. The three deities of fate had different expressions, and their eyes flickered with complex emotions. Legaruk had always been a dark cloud hanging over the heads of the Aesir gods. This fate indicated that the Aesir gods were about to completely fall. The 12 main gods would all wither, and less than a tenth of the Aesir gods would remain. The universe tree would also collapse at dusk, and the 9 worlds would all fall. In the flames of dusk, the world would fall into a long era of frost. For a long time, death would be the main theme of the future. Odin, the king of gods, could attract the archangel of the radiant paradise. He could hide it from others, but not from the 3 deities of fate. I hope our wise king of gods didn't invite a wolf into the house. Ords, the goddess of the past, had a hint of worry flickering on her aged face. Finally, the change of fate has been shaken. No matter how bad it is, it's just like in fate, the dusk of the gods. Verthandes, the goddess of the present, smiled. She was youthful and beautiful, sitting on a clean stone at the edge of the Black Scout spring. Her white and slender legs drew splashes in the clear and bright mirror-like Black Scout spring. In the splashes, it could be seen that a part of fate was violently fluctuating along with her slender legs. She might have a fortuitous encounter, become rich overnight, fall from the sky, or turn over a new leaf, and so on. There were all kinds of fates. The expressions of the other 2 deities of fate immediately returned to normal. Although the 3 deities of fate were members of the Aesir gods, they were also dissociated from the Aesir gods. The current enemy of the 3 deities of fate wasn't the dusk of the gods. It was another god of fate. In the Fog Country, another place where the universe tree's huge roots extended. In the 3-eyed Chaos Spring, where the ice spring, Wagmir, was located. Strictly speaking, the Fog Country was born before the World Tree took root and sprouted. The huge Fog Country was filled with thick fog all year round, an area shrouded in bitter cold. The great river that flowed out of the Wagmir spring had frozen into a huge glacier here. Over time, it had accumulated to an unfathomable height, and once it collapsed, it would emit a huge rumble. It was not easy to find the ice spring, Wagmir, in the endless glacier. But for a habitual thief like Qin Feng, it was not difficult at all. Within the glacier, Qin Feng saw a huge root of the World Tree that was like a towering mountain range. Outside the huge root was pure white snow, and it was shrouded in thick fog. Under the huge root, a cold spring was bubbling with water. A wave of extreme coldness emanated from it. Even ordinary sovereigns would shrink back when faced with this coldness that could freeze the laws of heaven and earth. Qin Feng's body was surrounded by a faint golden light. Within the faint golden light, countless cold energy was quietly absorbed and refined by the faint golden light when it was within 1,000 feet of his divine body. A hint of joy appeared in his eyes. The Aesir gods did not know what was good for them, and did not understand the use of the 3-eyed Chaos Spirit Spring. It benefited him for nothing. Actually, Qin Feng did not know that there were people who knew what was good for them. For example, the one-eyed king, Odin, had absorbed the wisdom spring water and understood some of the strange secrets of heaven and earth. Odin was very clear about the miraculous effects of the 3-eyed Chaos Spirit Spring. It was just that Odin was still in the God-King realm and could not refine it. He could only wait until he broke through to the paramount realm before absorbing it and increasing his cultivation. Chapter 1677. It wasn't that there wasn't a guardian under the ice-snow spring. The powerful original poison dragon Nidhogg was guarding under the spring, gnawing away at the roots of the universe tree and corroding the vitality of the world. Ordinary people, even Odin, wouldn't be able to gain any benefits if they were to head to the ice-snow spring. Above the ice-snow spring, when Qin Feng arrived, Nidhogg had already noticed Qin Feng's figure. However, Nidhogg didn't dare to make any reckless moves. As a primordial ancient god, Nidhogg's divine instincts were extremely astonishing. When that person arrived, he sensed an inconceivable radiance that transcended fate from that person's body. He had only seen such brilliance from some of the best primordial ancient gods. Above the past, present, and future. Utmost being. This was an extremely honorable utmost being. Nidhogg was nearly scared out of his wit. He tried his best to retract his aura, afraid that this unfamiliar utmost being would come looking for trouble with him. How could Qin Feng have the time to find trouble with Nidhogg? As long as this poison dragon didn't rush to his death, Qin Feng couldn't be bothered. Within the ice-snow spring, a faint golden light entered the spring water. Traces of the ice-snow origin source were extracted and fused into Qin Feng's essence spirit source. An extremely cold power emanated from the god power within his body. A tyrannical radiance that could freeze everything seemed to freeze the river of fate. Nidhogg hid under the spring water. Looking at this scene, he immediately understood Qin Feng's goal. It wasn't to get rid of him, the root of the universe tree, but this ice-snow spring. Nidhogg gritted his teeth. How could Nidhogg not know about the chaos origin source within the ice-snow spring? However, this chaos origin source was extremely strong and horrifying. He had tried to absorb it before. However, he only managed to absorb a trace of it, and it froze him for thousands of years. It took thousands of years for him to thaw. Such a treasure could only be touched and refined by an utmost being. Initially, he was prepared to devour the essence of the universe tree and witness the true meaning of the destruction laws to become an utmost being before slowly refining this ice-snow spring. Although he was a little jealous, Nidhogg heaved a sigh of relief. At least he managed to save a dragon's life. When Qin Feng absorbed the origin of primal chaos ice, the world lost its light and flames. The coldness on the ground intensified. Plains, mountains, lakes, strong winds and snow blew in all directions. Endless ice and snow fell from the sky, and the earth was sealed in ice. Without sunlight there would be no spring, summer, or autumn in the world. There would only be eternal winter. In the bone-chilling cold, living beings began to wither, and the power of the legion of gods was greatly affected. They began to weaken, and there were fewer and fewer places they could protect. Hunger and darkness that never saw the light of day became the main theme of the world. The world was filled with the shadows of suspicion and conflict. In order to compete for food, partners, and all kinds of resources, war and malice began to dominate the entire world. Order was collapsing like dominoes. Blood flowed like a river in the mortal world. People used spears and swords to kill each other. City-states fought against city-states, nobles against nobles, slaves against slaves. Blood dyed the earth red. In the wilderness, some powerful wild beasts that were hungry wandered around in search of food. They were also attacking cities and towns. People no longer forgave and helped each other. Brothers and sisters turned against each other, and father and son became enemies. They killed each other in ugly competition. The entire world became very uneasy, and evil spread like a plague. God's power was greatly weakened in this monstrous death and evil. Some of the monster seals that were suppressed by the legion of gods were attacked. Some tyrannical monsters appeared one after another, and the legion of gods of Aesir was in constant trouble. The giant race, not only the frost giants, but even the fire giants had begun to stir. The legion of gods of Aesir gradually lost control of the mortal world. The opportunity for the giant race had arrived. Becoming a legion of gods that stood above all living beings was an opportunity that the giant race yearned for even in their dreams. However, this disorder and chaos was alleviated when the sun and moon were born. The king of the legion of gods saw the order of the world collapsing. He used his peerless divine power to pierce through the sky and tear open the depths of the sky. He forcefully condensed a sun and a moon, and used this to restore the order of the world. This kind of death, and the melting of ice and snow, was undoubtedly an additional opportunity for the legion of gods of Aesir to catch their breath. However, at the sight of the spring of ice and snow, Qin Feng, who had already absorbed most of the origin of ice and snow, was rather displeased. Who was the one who benefited the most from the expansion of death and ice and snow? Apart from the goddess of winter, Skadi, it was him, the master of death and ice and snow. He wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to break through to the paramount realm in one fell swoop. Now that this opportunity was forcefully delayed, Qin Feng was naturally rather displeased. He opened his eyes, glanced at the sun and moon that appeared in the sky, and quickly came up with an idea. Odin, if you want to end the fate of the twilight of the gods and break through fate to become a paramount, you have to ask me. Murmuring, Qin Feng quickly closed his eyes. At this moment, his body was filled with a terrifying power of extreme cold. The origin of ice and snow appeared on his body, and the law of ice and snow was rapidly perfecting. Ice and snow would become the fifth manifestation on his body. Generally, when a paramount had one manifestation, it was already above the gods. For something similar to the void desolate world, being able to possess the power of three appearances was already something that was far stronger than most utmost beings. Now that he had 5 manifestations on his body, it was simply unheard of. However, Qin Feng also knew that although having 5 manifestations was far stronger than the average paramount, there was still a huge gap between him and the paramount realm. At this moment, in the stone cave, the tortured Loki also discovered that as the world fell into chaos, the divine power of the curse on the chain that bound him became weaker and weaker. When the divine power of the giant python above his head weakened, the female giant Sigurd took the opportunity to expel it. It freed a part of Loki's pain. As the fan flapped, it revealed his skinny upper body. At this moment, Loki was no longer satisfied with his elegant and handsome appearance in the immortal palace. His face was full of holes, and the black poison left terrifying holes, like the corrosion in a coffin. His red hair was messy, and his entire person was filled with darkness and coldness. When he raised his head, he also saw the birth of the sun and moon. His pair of eyes became deeper and deeper, and terrifying hatred rolled in them. After a moment, he said to the female giant Sigurd, "Let's fight Hati and Skur." Hati and Skur were Loki's grandsons. They were 2 demonic wolves, and also the sons of Loki's son, the demonic wolf Fenrir. They inherited the demonic wolf Fenrir's greedy power to devour everything. Since they were born, they were hidden by Loki in the iron tree forest in the underworld of Hyam. Of course, Aesir and the other gods didn't know this, but they couldn't hide it from Qin Feng, the lord of the death world. Chapter 1678. The 2 pups were raised by their grandmother, the female giant Angor. Giant Angor was the other wife of Loki, the god of fire. She gave birth to 3 monsters for Loki: demon wolf Fenrir, giant serpent Jemingard, and death god Hul. Of course, this was also thanks to Qin Feng's secret help. Otherwise, the king of the gods, Odin, would have been discovered when he came to Hyam's underworld. The 2 pups hated the Aesir gods ever since they were little. They witnessed how their father, demon wolf Fenrir, was tricked by the Aesir gods and imprisoned in the Garden of Asgard. The giant wolf's pleading, desperation, and anger were deeply engraved in their blood. They were wary and hateful of the Aesir gods. After receiving Loki's message, the 2 wolf pups were released by the female giant. They chased after the carriage that was pulling the sun and the moon in the void, driving the sun and the moon to a remote place, and trying to swallow the sun and the moon. Soon, the human world fell into winter and death again. When the Aesir gods saw the two little demonic wolves, they were shocked and tried to send several overgods to kill the two little demonic wolves. However, before they could do anything, more and more giant monsters broke out of the seal and attacked the mortal world. At the same time, the frost giants and fire giants in the mountains of the mortal world were getting restless under the lead of some giant. Loki wasn't the only one. In the world of death, Qin Feng didn't allow the sun and moon to appear. He controlled the god of death, Hul, and ordered the 4 subordinate gods and the 8 oracles to bring the powerful gods of death from the underworld of High Mu into the world. While fighting for territory, they also delayed the Aesir gods from eliminating Loki's subordinate. The country of true fire was a world of raging flames and magma. Within the scarlet-red mountain range, an extremely high temperature scorched the earth. One after another, huge flame giants settled down here. They were the descendants of flame giant Sult. Flame giant Sult was the ancestor of the flame giants. His origin could be traced back to a primeval ancient god, the ancient god of burning flame. That primeval ancient god had fallen in the primeval war. His corpse lay in a vast and boundless mountain range, eventually forming the kingdom of true fire. The flame giant Sult was born from the body of this primordial ancient god of fire. He was similar to Odin and could be considered a tyrannical ancient god of the previous generation. The fire giant Sult was a very powerful ancient god. He was also a god-king, but compared to the ambitious frost giants of the same race, he was much more powerful. The fire giant progenitor, Sult, was indifferent by nature and didn't have a world heart. However, there was an exception this time. Country of true fire, Muspelheim, in the center of a mountain, the fire giant's ancestral hall. Primogenitor, the children are ready. In the hall, many fire giant experts were gathered. Their leader was an abnormally tall giant with a bronze complexion. Fire giant aura lingered around him as he looked at the fire giant progenitor, Sult. Primogenitor, haven't you always been against us fire giants participating in the conflict with the Osso gods? Why are you attacking the Osso clan this time? The fire giant progenitor, Sult, looked up at the fire giant who had spoken, then swept his gaze across the rest of the fire giants. He chuckled in a deep voice. Haven't you all already guessed the answer to this question? There was some commotion in the hall. The fire giant who had spoken was somewhat agitated and in disbelief. Primogenitor, will you really be able to reach the paramount this time? Not just me, but also Odin and Loki. The fire giant progenitor, Sult said. He looked around at the many fire giant experts and said, at your level, you all already know a part of the secrets of the God King realm. If you want to break through to the paramount realm, just relying on cultivation is already difficult, and if you want to break through from the peak of the God King realm to the paramount realm, there is only one way, and that is to break through destiny. The fire giant progenitor said the last sentence one word at a time. Every peak God King expert who wants to break through to the paramount realm will face a calamity of certain death. There is almost no chance of survival. The fate of Odin, the king of gods, is Legolas, which is also the twilight of the gods. If he can turn the tide and let the decaying Osso gods be reborn in the flames, then he will be able to break through to the paramount realm. Loki's fate is the opposite of the king of gods. His fate is to die and live in the twilight of the gods. His fate is closely related to the king of gods, Odin. Once Odin breaks through Legolas, then it will be the end of his life. The fire giants looked at each other, and they could all see a hint of hidden shock and horror in each other's eyes. This was definitely an earth-shattering secret. Primogenitor, if that is the case, then why must our fire giant race participate? We can totally wait for both sides to suffer? Before this fire giant could finish speaking, He was immediately interrupted by the fire giant, who shook his head slightly. You are not god-kings after all. You are standing at a lower place, and your vision is too low. If Odin, the king of gods, breaks through fate and achieves that unimaginable paramount realm, do you think he will allow our fire giant race to have a paramount? The fire giant primogenitor laughed coldly. His gaze was filled with endless coldness as he looked at Asgard. After waiting for so long, the opportunity to break through to the paramount realm had finally arrived. This time, he must fight for it. At this moment, in a region outside the Nine Realms, in what seemed to be a kingdom of strong winds, many tall giants surrounded by strong winds gathered above a palace. Primogenitor, as you expected, Odin, the king of gods, has formed an alliance with the Lord of Light. He is trying to rely on the Lord of Light's power to survive the twilight of the gods. And this time, the Radiant Paradise has sent out one of the 7 archangels, the Archangel of Dawn, Lucifer. High and mighty, it was as if he was above the firmament. A blurry figure of light lingered around him, and there was a tyrannical aura of transcendence from him. In the Radiant Paradise, angels are divided into 9 levels. The lower 3 levels are 2-winged angels, and from lowest to highest, they are angel, archangel, and archangel. The middle 3 levels are 4-winged, energy angel, strength angel, and dominator angel. The upper 3 levels are 6-winged, throne angel, wisdom angel, and blazing angel. Lucifer is a 6-winged blazing angel of the upper 3 levels, and he is ranked first among the 7 archangels. He is strong enough. However, Odin still doesn't understand that it is not so easy to break through fate. If not for this, so many primordial gods back then wouldn't have. Chapter 1679. Beside the ice-snow spring, after more than 10 years of refinement, Qin Feng's body was filled with a cold white light. In the depths of his primordial spirit, his comprehension of the law of ice had also reached its peak. After a while, an icy light that could freeze the time of fate was emitted. This obscure fluctuation swept across the formless river of fate, but it disappeared into the depths of Qin Feng's primordial spirit in an instant. It's this fluctuation again. In several mysterious places, there were several stalwart existences with bewildered expressions. In these short few hundred years, there had been slight fluctuations in fate. They originally thought that it was a new divine king breaking through fate and shaking the river of fate to reach the paramount position. However, reaching the paramount position was definitely not just a slight change. This inexplicable change affected the thoughts of many experts hidden in the depths of the world. Qin Feng had perfect control over his aura. After completely perfecting the law of ice, he immediately retracted it. Ice and snow, this was Qin Feng's 5th manifestation. With the 5 laws of heaven and earth as the surface and the divine Tao as the interior, this relationship was very subtle. The divine Tao was like the origin of the soul, while the 5 laws were like joy, anger, sorrow, and joy. As long as one could achieve the unification of the exterior and interior, blending the interior and exterior, and completely fusing the various manifestations into the divine Tao laws that one created, one could completely break through to the paramount realm. This was also the essence of the 3-corpse slaying mystic technique. In Qin Feng's opinion, there should be 2 ways to break through to the paramount realm: the ultimate soul and the ultimate body. The 3-corpse slaying mystic technique should belong to the ultimate soul. Fusing the laws of great perfection into one's bloodline was a way to reach the ultimate level of one's physical body. Previously, Qin Feng had collected dragon blood to strengthen his bloodline and fused a portion of the laws of heaven and earth into it. What he walked was the ultimate body. If not for Taoist Hong Jun's 3-corpse slaying mystic technique, Qin Feng might have walked on the path of the ultimate body. As for whether one's physical body was stronger or the soul was stronger, this was a matter of different people's opinions. Qin Feng was only half a step away from the unification of the exterior and interior and the fusion of the interior and exterior. At this moment, he suddenly raised his head. Awo! Accompanied by one or two earth-shattering wolf howls, the sun and moon above their heads completely disappeared into the horizon. The sun and moon had been completely swallowed by the two sons of the demon wolf Fenrir. Rumble! It was as if the heavens and earth had been turned upside down. Before the deities could even react, they saw huge waves rising from the surface of the sea. The flood surged like a wild horse that had lost control. The gods saw a gigantic snake tail writhing in the air, and a miserable shriek could be heard from within. Among the Aesir gods, the god of coastal waters, Nold, one of the 12 main gods, had died in the mouth of a serpent. The snake of the atrium, Jemingard, had escaped. The Midgardian snake, Jemingard, had always been imprisoned in the depths of the oceanic trench by the Aesir gods. It was locked in the depths of the oceanic trench with a divine chain that ran through its 7 inches. It was guarded and suppressed by the god of the near seas, Niold, one of the 12 main gods of the Aesir gods. As the divine power of the gods declined, so did the divine chains. Finally, the seal was broken by the Midgardian snake, Jemingard. The Midgardian snake's body was said to be able to circle the world once, hence the name Midgardian snake. This ferocious snake had been sealed for so long, so how could it let the matter rest? The moment it came out, it was the first to swallow the god of the near seas, Niold, who was guarding it. Then, it turned its gaze to the Aesir gods and began to take revenge crazily. It set off a huge wave. The flood of Jinshan was nothing compared to its huge tail. The monstrous seawater overflowed the beach, the mountains, and the plains. The remaining living beings struggled in the monstrous flood, shrouded in death. At the same time, it spat out poisonous gas from its mouth. The poisonous gas turned into poisonous smoke, causing the world to become dark. A portion of the living beings who were lucky enough to escape the flood were poisoned to death by the poisonous gas. The seawater and poisonous gas rushed directly to the kingdom of the gods, Asgard. The world of death, Heim's netherworld. After absorbing most of the origin of ice and snow in the spring of ice and snow, Qin Feng returned to the world of death. As the Midgardian snake, Jemingard, escaped, Qin Feng felt that his Lord of Death godhood was surging crazily within a short period of time. The origin of heaven and earth that he could absorb from the Nordic world was increasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. The origin surged into his soul, and the 5 manifestations that he had mastered began to integrate into the rules of the divine path bit by bit. This integration was very slow, but Qin Feng felt it very intuitively. Every time he integrated a little, his soul would become stronger. As the Midgardian snake raised a huge wave, the shackles on Loki's body completely collapsed. Qin Feng could clearly see that in the cave, a divine light shot up into the sky, like a huge sun rushing towards Asgard. Qin Feng shook his head slightly. This world had a special cultivation system. It was easier to cultivate the body of a lord of gods than in other worlds, but the flaws were also very obvious. It was extremely susceptible to changes in the world. Once it fell into a great calamity like the twilight of the gods, its divine power would rapidly decline. Only by escaping the supremacy of fate could one escape this huge influence. Loki's escape was like blowing the horn of the twilight of the gods. In the kingdom of true fire in the south, accompanied by raging flames, the fire giants were ready to attack. Under the lead of the fire giant ancestor, Sult, they beat the war drums. Countless fire giants rushed out of the kingdom of true fire and attacked the kingdom of the gods. The blazing flames emitted a dazzling light, illuminating the dark world. Sult, how dare you! In the distance, an angry roar came from the depths of Asgard. An earth-shattering divine light accompanied by millions of divine lights fell like a meteor toward the gathered army. The god of fertility, the main god of the elven kingdom, Freyr, appeared. He was wearing divine armor, surrounded by boundless divine light, and the pressure of the main god was like thunder. "Freyr, is Asgard gone? They sent you to your death?" In the void, the fire giant ancestor, Sult, looked at the son of God King Vanir with some disdain. "Sult, don't be too arrogant. I'm more than enough to stop you." Freyr saw the disdain in the fire giant's eyes, and this erosion deeply stabbed his self-esteem. In his anger, he took the initiative to attack. On the other side, several divine lights fell one after another. His sister, the goddess of war, one of the 12 main gods of Aesir, and his brother-in-law, the god of summer, also descended to assist the god of fertility, Freyr, installing the fire giant ancestor. Rumble! In the east of Asgard, an earth-shattering sound rang out. The expressions of the Aesir gods changed again. In the east, the kingdom of frost giants was broken open. Under the lead of a mighty fleet of giant ships, a group of frost giants began to attack the Bifrost that led to Asgard from the east. Kill! The earth-shattering roars of slaughter shook the world. The Bifrost was the only way to the kingdom of the gods, Asgard. On the Bifrost, the god of protection, Heimdall, who was guarding the Bifrost, had long been entangled by Loki, who had escaped. The god of protection was exhausted. He could only blow the horn of the gods, using that mournful sound to warn the other gods and ask for reinforcements. Chapter 1680. In the fierce attack, the solemn Bifrost Bridge collapsed and shattered under the great power of the frost giants. The mountains collapsed and the rocks turned to dust. Seeing this situation, the army of the gods quickly picked up their weapons and went to reinforce. The fully armed Einherjar army, led by a part of the gods, quickly rushed to the rescue. The combat strength of this reinforcement army was quite strong. Every Einherjar army under the command of the gods was not an ordinary warrior. They were warriors selected by Odin, the king of the gods in the mortal world. Each of them was a hero in the mortal world when they were alive. The fierce battle began. The whole world was filled with dark clouds of war drums. Terrifying loud sounds echoed in the world from time to time. Occasionally, gods would fall and turn into meteors flashing across the sky. The sky seemed to be cracking and collapsing. The frost giants and the fire giants were not weak. Many monsters were led to charge toward Asgard. The gods of Aesir fell into a passive position for a while. From time to time, gods would fall. The two giants joined forces and quickly approached the giant. However, they were still far from defeating the Aesir god. After all, the Aesir gods had the geographical advantage. The gods were able to mobilize their forces. Loki, retreat. After all, you are also a member of the Aesir gods. Why are you so stubborn? On the Bifrost Bridge, as the reinforcements of the Aesir gods arrived and blocked a part of the frost giants, the pressure on Heimdall was greatly reduced. Golden light flowed all over his body. His eyes were slightly solemn as he looked above the void at Loki, who was in a ball of flame. Perhaps because of the long-term punishment, Loki's appearance was extremely terrifying. His face was as rotten as death. He frowned and looked in the direction of the world of death. What is Hull doing? It's past the agreed time. Loki's heart was a little heavy. The fire giants and frost giants might be able to make the gods pay a price, but they would never be able to destroy the rotten Aesir gods. He was worried that Death Hull was delayed by something. As for betrayal, he believed that his daughter would not do so. If he was defeated, the Aesir gods would never let Death Hull go. Kill! Facing the god of guards, he chose to attack directly. Monstrous flames rushed toward the Bifrost Bridge. Heimdall, the god of guards, was also a very powerful main god. He was slightly stunned, and immediately rushed toward Loki with his weapon. In the world of death, in the death hall, Death God Hull gloomily looked at the existence on the throne. Under his command were the four main gods of the Death Lord: the skeleton god of the skeletons, the Death Knight god of the Death Knights, the abomination god of the abominations, and the lich dragon god of the Dracolic. There were also 8 oracles of death: soul catcher, anxiety, hunger, wrath, destruction, greed, and conspiracy. Under the 4 subordinate gods and the 8 god envoys, there were many sovereigns and powerful lords of the world of death. Hull, please tell me your choice. Qin Feng looked at Death God Hull in the hall. Do you choose to stay in the hall and watch the twilight of the gods, where your father and brothers are defeated, or do you choose to lead the gods of death to support them and help Loki defeat Odin? Qin Feng's expression was indifferent. And Mimir, the giant of wisdom. Oh no, it's Mimir the headless. On the other side of the hall, there was a huge headless giant that emitted a monstrous aura of death. A power that was not inferior to a peak over God was on the giant's body. Resentment, hatred, unwillingness, despair, and anger seemed to have materialized. This was the giant of wisdom, Mimir, that Odin sent to Vanir as a hostage by the king of gods. This poor giant was known as the Giant of Wisdom. He knew all kinds of strange stories and was a master of wisdom. However, he did not know how to use his wisdom and was killed by Odin's scheme. Revenge, I must take revenge and cut off Odin's head. Black flames filled the sky as an earth-shattering roar came from the belly of the terrifying headless giant. The huge roar was like thunder, resounding in the world of death. What about you, the filial death goddess Hull? Can you bear to see your father Loki defeated and beheaded by the king of gods? Death god Hull looked at the existence on the throne with a gloomy expression. She had just woken up not long ago, but as soon as she woke up, she realized that the world of death had changed hand. During the years she was sealed, the world of death had undergone a huge change. She had tried to resist, but she soon realized that as the former Lord of Death, a over-god born in the world of death, she could not even get within 100 feet of the existence on the throne. Rumble! At this moment, heaven and earth trembled. Above the firmament, a starlight streaked across the sky. The gods were shocked. Many powerful gods who lived in a drunken stupor were stunned when they saw this scene. Some of them even cried out loud. Among the 12 Asur over-gods, a powerful over-god had fallen. It was the god of poetry, wisdom, and eloquence, Bragi. The god of poetry who was better at poetry than fighting and was mocked by Loki as a cowardly Prince Charming. Along with Bragi's death, there were several powerful fire giant experts. Before dying, Bragi did not die unjustly. He dragged the fire giant experts down with him. When the fire giant ancestor Sult saw this, he was furious. A fiery red spear appeared in his hand, and he began to bombard the over-god of fertility and the goddess of war who tried to stop him. The over-god of fertility and the goddess of war were forced to retreat. Rumble! Under such a high-density bombardment, the goddess of war, Freya, and her husband, who had never been loyal, were completely drowned in the flames amidst the screams of the god of summer. Damn it! Sult, I want you to pay with your life. The goddess of war screamed. She drew her bow and shot arrows. On the huge divine bow, arrows tore through the sky and passed through the flames. Many of them hit the fire giant ancestor Sult. This caused quite a bit of trouble for the fire giant ancestor. All gods of death, follow me! In the world of death, sensing the stalemate of the battle, Death God Hull finally made up his mind. No matter what the thoughts of this person who had usurped the world of death were, the most important thing now was to help Loki attack Sarsgaard. Huge white bone warships sailed out from the world of death, flags flying everywhere. The gods were instantly alarmed. Fire god Loki, who was attacking the Rainbow Bridge with all his strength, as well as the fire giants and frost giants, all turned around. They saw the headless fear giant Mimir steering the ship and rowing towards the kingdom of gods with the gods of death. The hellhound Gamu, whose chest was stained with blood, stood behind the former queen of the kingdom of death, Hull, on the deck. The ship was full of the world of death's army, and it was heading towards the kingdom of gods. The world of death's army was extremely fast. Many death wyverns, dragon liches, death knights, zombies, abominations, and skeletons covered the sky. For a moment, Loki and the others were overjoyed. On the other hand, the Aesir gods had extremely ugly expressions. Chapter 1681. With the world of death participating in the battle, the pressure on the world of Aesir increased greatly. The undead legion that blotted out the sky, under the attack of ghosts, skeletons, zombies, abominations, death knights, black knights, and bone dragons, the frost giants that were attacking the Bifrost Bridge felt the pressure greatly reduced. The undead legion that blotted out the sky and covered the earth did not know pain, fatigue, or pain. The seawater crazily surged towards Asgard from all directions. The world of death seemed to want to drag the entire world of the living into the world of death. Father God! He turned around and looked at his little daughter who had arrived late. Loki, who was already like a rotten corpse, had a rare look of gentleness on his face. Death Hull's expression was indifferent, just like her temperament. She just bowed slightly. "Are you okay?" Loki asked with a rare look on his face. Death Hull's eyebrows twitched as she glanced at Loki. She wanted to tell him about the situation of the world of death, but when it reached her mouth, she swallowed it back down. What Loki needed to do now was to focus on dealing with the King of Gods, this great enemy. If he knew that the world of death had changed hands, it might not be a good thing. "I'm fine." After making up her mind, Death Hull shook her head slightly and immediately said, "I just had a temporary delay." Loki glanced at Death Hull, and he saw Death Hull's hesitation in his heart. His eyes flashed, but Loki did not ask any more questions in the end. With the world of Death's army, the coalition attacking Asgard had the upper hand. Next was to completely sound the death knell for the decaying Aesir gods. He raised his head and looked into the depths of the sky. When the Aesir gods were in trouble, the King of Gods, Odin, and some of the main gods did not appear. The ones who commanded the Aesir gods to intercept Loki and his party were the god Queen Frigga and the god of thunder Thor. It was not that the King of Gods, Odin, was scheming behind the scenes, nor was it that he had long since grasped victory, but that he had encountered a huge problem. A few hours ago, as the Midgardian snake Jemengard escaped, Loki's eldest son, the leader of the three monsters, the demon wolf Fenrir also escaped at the same time. As Loki's eldest son, the giant snake Jemengard, Death Hull's elder brother, the demon wolf Fenrir's strength was 30% stronger than the two monsters. It was also more cunning and savage. Of course, this was not the reason why Odin, the king of the gods, personally took action. The main reason was that after this monster escaped, it began to take revenge on the Aesir gods and began to eat the gods in Asgard. In the few hours it had been free, thousands of Aesir gods had been devoured by it, including some of the main gods' children and concubines. In fact, there was no lack of powerful sovereigns who were devoured by this ferocious demonic wolf. Moreover, with this kind of unbridled devouring, the demon wolf's strength grew extremely fast. If it was allowed to continue eating, it would sooner or later devour all of Asgard, including him, the king of the gods. Odin held the golden Gungnir, his single eye searching for the demon wolf's whereabouts. However, the cunning demon wolf was unusually ferocious. It went to a different place, and after eating a portion of the gods, it did not stay for too long. Odin brushed past this demon wolf several times. Just as Odin, the king of gods, was chasing after the demon wolf. Rumble! What happened next made things worse. It was accompanied by an earth-shattering bang. Under the stunned gazes of the Aesir gods, the fire giant ancestor Sult, and the fire god Loki, the entire world tree suddenly tilted. It's the original poison dragon, Nidhogg. In the world of death, Qin Feng's face revealed an inexplicable expression. This dragon of destruction did not disappoint him. It had already eaten most of the roots of the tree of the universe and hollowed out more than half of the tree of the universe. What kind of existence was the tree of the universe? It was the foundation of the Nordic world. As the tree of the universe could no longer support itself, Asgard on the tree of the universe began to collapse. Rumble! Amidst the earth-shattering noise, the three worlds standing at the top of the tree of the universe, Asgard, the elven kingdom, and the human world began to tilt toward the vast and boundless sea. In fact, to some extent, the tree of the universe grew on the boundless sea. The tree of the universe was surrounded by the Aesir gods. Further away, there were not only the Aesir gods, but also many abnormally tyrannical existences. For example, a bright heaven. Another example was the many kingdoms radiated by the gods of Mount Olympus. The collapse of the tree of the universe did not have much impact on other places, but it had a huge impact on the Aesir gods. Its importance was similar to that of the gods of light and bright heaven, the Aesir gods and Mount Olympus, and so on. With the tree of the universe hollowed out, the gods felt that the power they could borrow was even less. The power they could exert was greatly reduced. If this had happened in normal times, it might not have been a big deal. The Aesir gods would only need some time to adapt, and they would be able to shake off the influence of the tree of the universe. But at this critical juncture, the tree of the Aesir gods' backbone was almost broken. Rumble! Freya! With a loud bang and a heart-rending scream, the fire giant ancestor instantly seized this fleeting opportunity. A fiery light turned into a sharp arrow and pierced through the incomparably beautiful divine body of the goddess of war, Freya. This beautiful and valiant goddess of war only had time to leave her brother with a sad and sorrowful smile before she was reduced to ashes in the fiery light, completely annihilated. It was not just the goddess of war, Freya. God of dawn Heimdall, god of dawn Delin, god of bow and arrow Uriel, god of day Dagu, god of valor Modi, goddess of prophecy Jeffrey, goddess of spring, goddess of night, and many other existences whose divine power was close to that of a prime god were almost completely annihilated by this wave of attacks. Billions of gods and billions of allied armies. Both sides were in a frenzy. After witnessing their friends, disciples, and children perish on the battlefield, the experts on both sides were on the verge of madness. The flames of war pierced through the boundless firmament for billions of miles. Many powerful existences noticed this crazy war. Above the distant sea, several blazing auras gazed in the direction of the tree of the universe. This really makes one's blood boil. I can't wait any longer. Among them were several stalwart existences whose eyes were filled with fighting spirit. Their auras were abnormally powerful divine kings, and there was no lack of peak divine kings among them. The one who spoke was an incomparably valiant and imposing male god in golden armor. He had an aura similar to that of the goddess of war, Freya. It was the aura of the divine domain of war. But compared to the goddess of war, this god of war was much more powerful. His powerful divine power formed a terrifying god of war's domain of war. Ares, I advise you to calm down and use your reckless, muscle-bound brain. Athena, what do you know? This is the world that truly belongs to the god of war. Although you are also a god of war, if you don't understand this, you will never become a true god of war. Chapter 1682. Just as the war between the Aesir gods and the allied army was in full swing, Qin Feng had already quietly left the world of death and infiltrated Asgard at the same time. Qin Feng had never woken up early without benefit. He suddenly entered Asgard because Qin Feng suddenly remembered that there was a very precious treasure in Asgard. The value of that treasure was not inferior to the 3 springs of chaos. As far as he knew, that treasure was hidden in the Garden of the Gods of Asgard. The Garden of the Gods was also called the Garden of 10,000 Years. In the Garden of 10,000 Years, there were countless strange flowers and herbs growing, the most important of which was the golden apple tree. Although the Aesir gods were born to control the rules and were incomparably powerful, perhaps because of the different cultivation systems, although the Aesir gods had an endless lifespan, they would not age. They were easily affected by a part of the power in their clergy, and as their temperament was affected, they would age. And the golden apple tree was very important to the Aesir god. It had a strange power that could prevent the gods from aging and maintain their youth. In Qin Feng's opinion, the reason why the Aesir gods were aging was more due to the influence of the divinity of the rules, and it could eliminate the influence of the divinity of the rules. This golden apple tree was definitely extraordinary. When Qin Feng entered Asgard, the whole of Asgard was already filled with the flames of war. Some fire giants, frost giants, and the powerful monarchs of the world of death had already invaded Asgard. The peaceful Asgard in the past was like hell, and there were terrifying beacons everywhere. In the Garden of 10,000 Years, Qin Feng finally saw the golden apple tree. It was an apple tree about 10 feet tall. The ancient tree was golden, and several golden apples could be vaguely seen between the leaves. There was no lack of green. There was no need to pick it. With just a glance, Qin Feng immediately understood the value of this golden apple tree. Eternal substance. He could feel the faint aura of eternity in it. Qin Feng's eyes lit up. Eternal spirit root. This was an extremely rare eternal spirit root. The golden apple contained an extremely rare eternal substance. Right now, Qin Feng was painstakingly trying to achieve the unification of the exterior and interior, the severing of 3 corpses, the ultimate limits of the soul and the ultimate limits of the fleshly body. What was all of this for? Wasn't it to allow the soul to break through the ultimate limit, or the fleshly body to break through the ultimate transformation and condense a trace of eternal matter? Cultivate the eternal soul or eternal body. Qin Feng had a look of realization in his eyes. Perhaps only the eternal substance could allow the Aesir gods to expel the influence of the laws of heaven and earth and allow them to stay young forever. His eyes blazed with passion. The golden apple tree might not contain a lot of eternal substance, but the spirit root's advantage was that it could last for a long time. The Aesir Divine clan didn't know what was good for them, and they were letting him off easy. He waved his sleeves. Boom! With a flash of light, the entire golden apple tree was uprooted. Yes! The next moment, he raised his head and looked at the horizon of the eternal garden. A hint of surprise flashed across his eyebrows, but he didn't stop. With a wave of his sleeve, a spatial force swept up the golden apple tree and brought it into the space of his sleeve. His figure flashed and disappeared on the spot. In the next second, several faint white lights pierced through the sky and landed at the place where the golden apple tree had disappeared. Wearing white robes and flickering with boundless light, several mysterious figures looked at the place where the golden apple tree had disappeared with gloomy expressions. Who beat us to it? A low and angry voice sounded from under the hat of a white-robed man. Lucifer, what should we do? My lord has ordered that the golden apple tree is very important. Even if we don't take the 3 spirit springs, we must take back the golden apple tree. Now that the golden apple tree has been lost, how can we report to my lord? Several white-robed men looked at the leading white-robed man with burning anger in their eyes. Lucifer glanced at the few of them. These were the most powerful archangels under the Lord of Light. They were also 6-winged upper angels. Although they were only level 8 archangels, They were comparable to ordinary top lord. After pondering for a while, he raised his head and said calmly, Gabriel, Raphael, there is an old saying in the East, the mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. This time, we are not the only ones entering Asgard. Many powerful beings are spying from afar. As for missing the golden apple tree, I will report to my lord. I will also bear the responsibility. The white-robed men looked at each other and were about to speak again. Lucifer waved his hand. Now, since the golden apple tree has been stolen, the only thing left is to complete my lord's mission. His gaze fell on one of the white-robed men. Gabriel, head to the country of true fire. There's a core of true fire in the depths of a volcano there. If you absorb the core of true fire, you should be able to break through to become a level 9 angel, which is what these false gods call the divine king realm. After saying that, his gaze fell on another white-robed man beside him. Legel, go to Jotunheim. That is the nest of the frost giant. There is also a treasure in the nest of the frost giant. That is the foundation of the frost giant. It is called the ice stone. With it, you will also have a high chance of mastering the ice ability and breaking through in one go. As for Uriel, go to the underworld of Jotunheim. Now that the world of death has turned out in full force, if you can seize the opportunity to seize the world of death and condense the divine domain of the Lord of Death, your power as the guardian angel of the underworld will also increase. After saying that, he turned to the remaining white-robed men. The few of you will go separately and help them. Help them block some trouble. Lucifer, what about you? The white-robed men looked at the six-winged blazing angel in the lead. Lucifer's handsome face revealed a bright smile. As for me, I will naturally help our honorable ally, the King of Gods, Lord Odin, defeat his enemy, the ugly and evil god Loki. The white-robed men looked at each other and nodded slightly. After a while, several white lights rushed out in all directions. While the six-winged angels under the Lord of Light were making their move, above the huge ocean world. Apollo, I leave the kingdom of true fire to you. A valiant and beautiful goddess looked at one of the powerful gods who was like the sun. Leave Jotunheim to me. I've always been curious about that ice stone. A goddess with a golden bow in her hand raised her head and said. She was beautiful and holy. She wore golden battle armor, and her figure was astonishingly graceful. She was tall and slender, and there was also a frosty coldness to her. Very good, Artemis. Then I hope you can gain something. The beautiful and wise Valkyrie looked at another valiant god of war who had a fanatical look. Ares, then I leave the world of death to you? No. That gloomy place. If you like it, you go fight for it. The valiant god of war seemed rather impatient, his eyes burning slightly as he looked at the battlefield in the sky. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.